Already did. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we're going to finish up the review on the debate I had with Inspiring Philosophy, inshallah. And I got two of my friends here, Talib and Ibn Fadl. We're going to be reviewing it and finishing it up today, inshallah. And possibly tomorrow, if not tomorrow, after tomorrow, inshallah, we will be doing an open Q&A or open like live discussion if anyone wants to interrogate our points, or they want to see if they could challenge, or if they want any clarification points, you guys can come on, whether it be Christian, Muslim, it'll be open to everyone, right? So where we left off yesterday, I think it was on this part of the video. Yeah, so it's 46 minutes and 57 seconds. I'm going to put on 1.5. Yeah, I think 1.5 should be fine. I'll just turn the subtitles on. Okay.
It has nothing to do with the actual question we're supposed to be talking about, whether if it is moral to consummate a marriage with a girl who has reached puberty. Appealing to popularity or popular Christian beliefs does not determine what is moral. As William Lane Craig has said, if the Nazis had won the war and it convinced everyone that Nazism is right, that wouldn't make Nazism right in the world who has these views. And that would not mean I'm wrong, that it is wrong to consummate a marriage with a girl who just reached puberty. So we need to talk about what is objectively the case in terms of ethics, and not just constantly, well, Aquinas said that. I don't care. We're trying to talk about ethics and what's objectively the case. This is why I'm appealing to science, which is a better objective standard than what some doctor of theology said 800 some years ago. Sure.
Yeah, but even then, Talib, isn't that like kind of contradictory to the whole philosophy of science? Science never actually gives you the definitive truth. That's like the beauty of science, is it's based upon induction, right?
Yeah, it's always progressive in nature. It's not really ever static like that. And yeah, it'll change. Man, his position on this will just change with the science as it goes. There is no one size fits all in this regard. As there's more evidence, as more evidence shows itself, his view will change and it will morph. And every time we're supposed to believe that it morphs, it's supposed to be moral every single time, and that's the only moral judgment you can have. But it morphs every time, so it's a bit of a strange position to take for someone who professes that he believes in God. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you would think just intuitively, so your objective source of morality won't be coming from science, where it progresses and it's based on like human fallibility as well. Of course, there's evidence that comes with it, but with inferences regards to morality, you would think that would be dependent upon tradition or some scripture, especially considering I made the point before how people weren't like bereft of the knowledge that it is harmful, more harmful for a young person to get married than to consummate than if they were in their prime ages, right? Everyone knew that. Like, this isn't something that we only figured out in the modern age. Same thing with geriatric pregnancies. People in the pre-modern age, they would have known this as well. They would have known there's extra harms with regards to this. So
they would have known it exponentially more. It would have been even more rampant. All the issues associated with it would have been even more clear to everyone, because
exactly.
the mortality of the mother, the mortality of the child, anything you can think of would have been much. There would have been much rates of all of this stuff going on.
And I just want to say, like, where he's using the science as like a way to derive morality, but how can you even derive that from science, that harming is immoral? Like, what scientific evidence does he have to arrive at that conclusion that if you harm X person, an innocent person, therefore it's immoral? How can you? And this is the issue we have with the atheists. Like, atheists say, "Oh, your prophet did X, therefore it's immoral." No, but why? Oh, because it's harmful. But why is harm bad? They can't answer this question. And also, I would like to point out that he's misrepresenting DEEN. He's not saying, DEEN, your point wasn't, oh, Aquinas said so, therefore it's moral. No, that wasn't the point. The point is, look, your own church history, for the longest period of time, you're just saying they were jahil, they're just ignorant. They had no idea of morality. You figured it out in the last 50 years, what morality was, when they boosted up the age of consent to 18. Nice. Like,
yeah, and it's a strong one also, because I didn't have it rest on an isolated case of Aquinas. It was a thing where I took into account all of Christian history for 1700 years. What was their attitude towards the minimum age of marriage? And it always was with regards to whenever the person would reach the age of puberty. Now, on another point, as you mentioned, though, he would just like appeal to virtue ethics and say, okay, we want to reduce harm because Jesus gave this principle of don't do onto someone that you wouldn't want for yourself. Now, with that principle, as Talib mentioned, and as I mentioned in the debate, the harm that people would have been seeing from the early church would have been exponentially greater and more amplified due to the fact that the access to medical facilities and the quality of the medical facilities would have been reduced like to a way greater level. So, yeah, that's. I mean, even with his virtue ethics position, it makes no sense in light of the history.
And it's not just resting upon one doctor, like saying this being Aquinas, I mentioned Tertullian origin, as well as the custom of the Christians for 1700 years, allowing such marriages being minimum age.
False.
Okay, I'm going to give you a reference, but before I do, I wanted to actually address one more thing. Give me 1 sec, just pull it up. Okay. All right, so I did include in my video. So the title is Age of Consent, a Historical Review. I don't know how to pronounce the names, but it's spelled VERNL, then space would be L dot, and last name.
Start over, spell it again.
So VERN.
Okay.
And the summary of this historical review says, the age of consent throughout history has usually coincided with the age of puberty, although at sometimes it has been as early as 7. Early on, age of consent was a familial or tribal matter and only became a legal one in the Greco-Roman period. The Roman tradition served as the base for Christian Europe, as well as the Christian church itself, which generally, essentially based upon biological development, set it at 12 or 14, but continued to set the absolute minimum at 7.
Okay,
So I give you
I gave you a review about the historian, right?
Yeah. But before you reply, I'm giving you one historical overview, but I can give you other sources as well. But you haven't given me anything that would actually give me any contradictory view on whether the early church didn't believe such a practice was okay. I'm giving you one right now that actually suggests that the minimum age, absolute minimum, was 7. Right. So if you could give me a study that contradicts this, I'll be willing to look into it.
So you're citing a guy who specializes in American history and sexologist, right?
Sure.
Okay. Kim Phillips is actually a medieval historian. Okay, she actually went through and showed that no, that throughout Europe, for example, they were not doing that. This was again around the age of 20 is when these marriages were.
You keep doing this. You keep doing the average age thing.
Now,
Show me the minimum age.
Okay, so minimum age is 12. Okay, that also doesn't say consummation. Okay, but again, you're.
Oh, this guy can't be serious. I was actually in disbelief when he said that point. Like, okay, first he was trying to shift it like sleazily by saying, "Oh, well, I referenced actual historians that say the average age was so and so. Why is that relevant to the minimum age?" And he later conceded, okay, 12 is the minimum age, but then he added the stipulation, oh, well, it was 12, but it wasn't necessarily consummation at 12. Okay, well, the age could have even been less than 12, even if they were ready for consummation. Like these pre-modern societies were open to the idea that it could be before that even. So let me pull up the actual source I was reading from. If we just check here. Okay. So this is just like from my TikTok where I put like all my sources there, right? Now, as I read, right, it goes through like the age of consent, and this is the source: age of consent historical overview, right? So if anyone wants to like actually look at the sources for everything I'm quoting, you can find it all on my TikTok, inshallah, on this slideshow. It goes through pretty much like all the sources. Maybe I missed a couple.
You're assuming that let me finish, okay? You're assuming, for example, consummation is going to happen. You're also assuming that they said, yeah, every 12-year-old is fine. It's very clear that when you read what they're saying, they said it could be possibly as early as 12 if they're ready for it, like if they developed or something. That just is not how it practically ever played out. And we have no evidence that a 12-year-old would actually be ready at that point. This seems to be more like we get the canon law, as like Phillips or as like Sadler talks about when it comes to Jewish ideas. These are like ideals. These are not actually the way these are practically playing out, which is problematic. So, you, for example, have like, for example, law in the US that, minimum age is like 18. That's rarely how it practically plays out because most people aren't ready for marriage until they're in their 20s now. So just because you have these ideals set, that doesn't mean that's practically what's playing out, or that like they actually think that about 12-year-olds on like happening.
Of course, I don't even agree that this is a minimum, absolute minimum, or every 12-year-old would be ready. I don't even agree with that, right? Some 12-year-olds.
I don't think there's any evidence any 12-year-old would be ready.
Okay, well, you're contradicting 1700 years of Christian tradition because they do say 12-year-olds can actually meet it, with there being even exceptions below that. So,
okay, but the
reason why they put out
shows you they're not.
Sure. Like, I don't take my morals or ethics. I don't think Christians would mostly have the basis of their morals and ethics coming from science either. But I'll just give one more question before we get into, because I do want to talk about the age of monarchy, the average age, and so on. So my question is this: is your response only possible with the entailment of the falsehood of the Catholic Church, given that the Catholic Church actually allows, for my view, so the only way to object to Islam at this point with your argument is to relinquish Catholicism? Is that correct?
To relinquish Catholicism? I don't get what you're asking here. So they said a minimum age is like 12, but the girl has to be ready. That does not mean they're saying, yeah, this should happen for 12-year-olds. I mean, you have to understand there's a difference between like an ideal in terms of like what they say they're saying is sort of like in legal theory. It could possibly have happened this early in their ideas. And they're just simply wrong about that. I don't have to condemn the entire Catholic theology because they're wrong about one issue here. That doesn't follow.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So excuse me. Give me 1 second. Is my voice still clear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. My question would just be that can someone be a Catholic and view these views as immoral? The answer is no. Like you can't contradict the statements of the popes. Neither the things.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Wait 1 second. Let me clarify that. A statement of a pope or that doesn't contradict predecessors who conform to this view. You can't condemn that. Like it just contradicts fundamental Catholic doctrines, and it's just it's just a really
no, there are Catholics that disagree. For example, Joshua Sijiwati is a social Trinitarian.
Okay, yeah, so I didn't have the quote on me at the time, but there is like a quote from the Council of Trent, which talks about this very topic, saying that you can't actually disagree with the impediments established by the church, right, when it comes to marriage. So this is the Council of Trent, Doctrine on the Sacrament of Matrimony, on Doctrines and Canons, on Canon number 4. If anyone says that the church could not establish impediments dissolving marriage, so that's not what's in dispute here. So the church has authority to establish impediments on making marriages annulled. But on the second section, it says, or that she has erred in establishing them, let him be anathema. So anyone who says that the church has erred in establishing impediments to marriage, then he's anathematized. And part of the impediments established by the church is the age of marriage. So he as a Catholic, you can't disagree with that. So yeah, like you can still claim you're Catholic the same way someone could still say, oh, I'm still Muslim, even though I claim there's a prophet after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like how Ahmadis and Qadianis claim so. You can title yourself that, but no, according to what the definition of a Muslim is, as in he holds to the tenets and core doctrines of Islam, doesn't contradict them, you're not technically one. So in the same way here, you can't technically be a Catholic. You can still claim to be a Catholic, but you can't within the definition that Catholics give within their own councils and within their own traditions. You can't maintain this position as a Catholic. You're going to have to concede that marriages with young girls, ages 12, and even possibly younger if they meet the criteria of reaching the age of puberty, is moral.
Yeah, Catholic theology teaches Latin Trinitarianism. Okay, you don't have to agree with the Pope on everything. You got a weird view how the Catholic Church works.
No, I never said everything. I said on doctrines that they allow that don't contradict their predecessors. So no Pope preceding them, or no doctor preceding them, or no early church father preceding them, ever contradicting their view. If you're going to posit something new, I mean, you're throwing 1,700 years of tradition under the bus.
Again,
I mean,
this is irrelevant to the actual conversation we're supposed to be having, whether or not it's moral. You just keep appealing to popularity or ideas in the past that supports your idea.
I'm positing that a Catholic would find it moral.
Okay. Okay, you can posit that. That's completely irrelevant to the actual topic. Why can't we debate the topic? Why do you keep saying, yeah, well, this guy in the past said it was okay. Well, that guy was wrong.
I'm showing you that your view isn't representative of the norm. Moral outlook. I mean, that's gonna not be a problem for you, but a lot of Christians have a problem with that.
Hey,
now
you're just trying to do character assassination. You're trying to say, look, Christians, he doesn't agree with what Thomas Aquinas said 800 years ago on this issue that Thomas Aquinas wasn't an expert on. Okay, I think most Christians would agree with me that you shouldn't be consummating a marriage with a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old.
That's a straw man because my whole argument isn't relying upon this. Relying upon 1,700 years of Catholic, not Catholic, but early church tradition.
That doesn't determine what is moral necessarily.
Well, a lot of people would assume that they wouldn't legislate pedophilia for a good 1,700 years.
Doesn't determine if it's moral.
No worries. I want to talk about the average age of monarchy now. So I agree with you that the average age of monarchy would be probably between like 13 to 14 during the medieval ages. But really what you're saying when you say that is you're saying that the average medieval person living in those times, so the average woman, would be menstruating between 13 and 14 because they weren't nutritionable, right? That's mainly what it is. Nutrition is the main factor. And I agree with you on that. You mentioned that many times. I agree. Studies say this as well. They all agree. Okay. Now, do you believe that Aisha menstruated?
I have no opinion on whether she did or not.
Okay.
I would say this. So I'd say it's very, very unlikely that she did because it's not just based on nutrition. It's also based on family genetics. So like, for example, science shows, for example, and I know you're not all for science and all, but let's bring it in here. Science shows, for example, what a mother eats while she is carrying the child will help determine not only the genetics of her own child, but the grandchildren. Because again, when a girl is developing in the womb, she's getting all her eggs that she'll eventually, release when she reaches menarche. So what you're eating determines not only your own genetics, it can also affect your own genetics, your epigenetics, but also your children and your grandchildren. This is why we see in the modern era, the age of menarche is slowly coming down because it takes generations to get down. It's not just something, hey, luckily we had this one girl, we just happened to hit the lottery and now we're feeding her like crazy. And lo and behold, menarche is coming later. It's based on also family history of the nutritional past.
So Yeah, I think race has a role to play in early monarchy. I can cite some studies now, so you can pull them up and maybe have a look at them. So the first one is maturational timing and overweight prevalence in U.S. adolescent girls. That's the first study I'm going to cite. In this study, it says that overall, early maturing girls were nearly twice as likely as average maturing girls to be overweight. So there's a clear link between eating a lot and gaining a lot of weight compared to girls that aren't doing so, right? They also cited that significantly higher proportions of Black and Hispanic girls experience menarche before the 11 years of age, for 10 and under, right? Now, there's a correlation, as I showed like in the table. I don't have it from me right now, but I remember there was a table presented where they showed the high correlation between like certain types of races and certain practices of like eating a ton and gaining a lot of weight, right? Now, we actually have a hadith where Aisha was eating a lot to the point where she said she grew plump, right? Prior to consummation. We have evidence to gain, so we're not just saying it's possible she menstruated or it's possible she reached the age of physical maturity. We're saying that it's probable that she did based upon the evidence. Now, I have another one too, because that study doesn't go through Arab girls. There's a study done in Kuwait, age of menarche and its relationships to body mass index amongst adolescent girls in Kuwait. And what they find is that girls under the age of, between the ages of 10 and younger, it posits that 8.5% of the participants reached the age of menarche in these ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way you kind of frame it as like, it's like, oh, we hit the lottery. No, bro, like that's not the case. There's clear evidence that based on Aisha being of a higher socioeconomic status, her gaining a lot of weight, her being of Arab descent, these play factors on a girl reaching menarche early, and I have reasons to believe now on a probable framework, not just a possible case here, that she did reach menarche. So that's all I wanted to say on that topic.
So that still makes it immoral. She's still 9.
No
Her temporal lobe.
Yeah, the thing is, the reason why I brought that up as a point of discussion is because, like, as you guys just heard from the live, he did say like, oh, it's like a lottery, like some girl menstruating at the ages of 9 or 10. No, it's not. Like if the conditions are met, the likelihood isn't like some 0.1% basis. It could, like, as I showed within people in Kuwait. Actually, I can pull up the stats now. Even let me pull up the stats now.
One thing I want to say, he keeps saying, "Oh, morality doesn't come from popularity. Morality doesn't come from popularity." Well, no, it shows us something, that if a group of people since prior to a certain time period, specifically the liberal, secular, like before liberal secularism became popular, every single one of the like tribes, countries, different nations, they all agreed. They'd never agreed on this made up age of 18, this miraculous age of 18 being this be all end all, right? So I don't know why he keeps saying, hand waving it off as if it doesn't mean anything. It shows us clearly that all these different people from different cultures, they all agreed on this. So he can't, like, I don't know why he's just trying to pretend like it doesn't mean anything.
No, they're
Sorry.
waiting for the temporal lobe to fully develop, man.
Yeah.
That's what they're waiting for.
Like they don't understand that back then biology is determined what is a child from a woman. So when they would see certain physical features such as menstruation, that would be indication of the woman. Now she's a woman, not she's no longer a child. That's just how it worked.
Yeah, and like that was the best way to see if they were physically ready, and even on the mental aspect, how they would determine that would just be based upon if they can bear adulthood responsibilities or not, right? Now, if we go to the study I was citing, so the first one is maturation timing and overweight prevalence in U.S. adolescent girls. This is exactly as I quoted. So overall, early maturing girls were nearly twice as likely as average maturing girls to be overweight. Then they show a table, but I don't have it here. Significantly high proportions of Black and Hispanic girls experience menarche before 11 years of age, so 10 and under. And then the second study that I cited from Kuwait, age at menarche and its relationship to body mass index amongst adolescent girls, it says early menarche defined as less than 11 years of age was found in 106 or 8.5% of the participants. Now, if more of the participants were more overweight than others within the population that they were studying from, then you would have seen it even higher than that, most likely, as evidenced by like the other study, right? Now, I think I wanted to share.
By the way, just a side point: why is it that in these same liberal secular societies that that he's okay with, right? Why do they teach us like sex ed in school? They don't tell us don't do it until you're 18. They don't say that. They say, oh, make sure you wear protection because you don't want to get AIDS and herpes. They say they give you all of this thing to prevent from sexual diseases, but they never tell you, oh no, wait until you're 18 till your frontal lobe is developing. Like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is silly.
And if we check, I think it was this one, if I'm not mistaken. I think maybe I went past it. Okay, here we go. So this was the hadith I was referencing as well. So Sunan ibn Majah 3324, it's graded Sahih. My mother was trying to fatten me up when she wanted to send me to the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, when she got married, but nothing worked until I ate cucumbers with dates. Then I grew plump, like the best kind of plump. So she gained a bunch of weight. So yeah, on a probable basis now, because he was trying to say before, like most likely Aisha was prepubescent when she married the Prophet. It's very, very unlikely she reached the age of menarche. But obviously, like I completely destroyed that, and he's just going back to, okay, well, even if she did menstruate, it's still considered immoral. But now we got to get into whether that standard is true or not. And yeah, like as you're mentioning, Ibn Fadl, if a bunch of people, if there is a popular opinion based upon a Christian, like general people, then fine, yeah, that's maybe not the strongest point. But if you talk about particularly a group that claim to follow Jesus and claim to follow the disciples, and the Bible itself says they will carry on the tradition of the disciples and the traditions of Jesus, being the early church, then yeah, of course, that's a good point to be
And
made.
it's not just popularity. Like, I don't know why he's saying popularity as if it's like it's just, oh, it was just popular. It's just one of the popular beliefs. No, this was the literally like ijma, like consensus, pre like liberalization. This was every single society agreed on this, even the Christians. So I don't know why he's just totally ignoring this.
Not developed, or kids not developed. You have severe several mental disorders because you're engaging in activity that no 9-year-old should ever engage in.
Sure. Do you at least agree, at least like just on the basis of me making a probabilistic case that I've shown you some evidence and maybe you weren't exposed to before, that does increase the likelihood that she would reach stage of menarche?
I will say that I will look into it. I still think it's unlikely because, again, you mentioned a local, you mentioned 8% possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And again, this is based on like modern girls where there's a lot more nutrition and we see the age of menarche coming down. I will look into those studies. But again, this is completely irrelevant. I have never said like, because Aisha didn't reach menarche, therefore it was immoral what Muhammad. That has never been my argument. Even if I said in the videos, even if I saw a miracle she did, still immoral because you're setting her up for all sorts of physical issues if she were to get pregnant, and the mental disorders are going to start flowing in. It's immoral. You should not be putting any girl through that. And again, it wasn't even common at the time. We know this because we know to look at the various different cultures and they're delaying marriage and most mainly consummation of marriage until later years.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't common. Now, this isn't my position, but this is a possible case I could make. But I
by the way, pause it, Dean. Pause it.
Yeah,
You just to correct you, like that's not true. It was pretty common. Imam Shafi actually talks about it. He says that he met individuals who were like a woman at the age of 9. Like this is mentioned. He mentions this. So it was popular, and not only that, and we also have the marriage from Aisha herself proves it to be popular. Why? Because before she got married to the Prophet ﷺ, she was already about to get engaged to someone, and you mentioned this in the debate. So this shows this was a popular belief.
So if you're talking about within that particular context, them reaching the age of menarche at like 9 or 10, yeah, it would be more common. But particularly getting married at those ages,
no, it was common. It was
Imam Nawawi talks about I think in the commentary of one of the hadiths regarding Aisha, he says that unless you see there to be great benefit from marrying off your daughter at such young ages, then it shouldn't be done. So obviously it's considered to be like not a general thing. It's
right.
seen as a exceptional thing where you see benefit, then you go on and betroth your daughter and get her married off at a young age. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, even in another hadith where his daughter Fatima, when Umar and Abu Bakr approached Fatima for her hand in marriage, approached the Prophet, he said like she's young still, right? But then when Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, came and asked for her hand in marriage, then he allowed for it. So obviously there's more, just because someone reaches the age of puberty in Islam, that doesn't mean that the father would necessarily marry off their daughter. There's much more things that come into play here.
I found the narration, by the way. It says, Shafi saying, I hasten to say that I have heard from women in Tahama region attaining maturity at 9 years. Imam Shafi. This is what he says. So this shows that.
He mentions that like at 9 years old they would menstruate. I've seen that narration. Imam Shafi mentions that they would menstruate at 9. He'd see girls pregnant at the age of 10. Yeah, that is true.
You care about age numbers, to be honest. I care more so on the criteria. What would you make of someone saying the position that Aisha got her age wrong on the basis that they didn't have
Okay, I'm just gonna skip through this part because it's just me going through like the possibility that she was like, let's say 10, 11, or 12, or even 12 is a bit pushing it, but that sort of opinion doesn't conflict with the hadith, because at that point you're just saying that Aisha's what she had at her disposal to determine how old she was wasn't good enough to give her a definitive idea of how old she was. So she could have possibly been like 10, 11, or 12. But this doesn't like put her reliability as a narrator in question. It just puts into question the methodology she used at the time, in the same way as if, let's say, a companion said, I saw 1,000 people on the battlefield, and that companion is trustworthy. Okay, obviously the companion isn't like counting one by one 1,000 people. He's giving an estimate based upon like the best of his understanding. So the same way Aisha would just be giving like her best estimate according to what she had at her disposal at the time. And what they had at the disposal at the time wasn't a calendar. The calendar was actually introduced at the time of Umar ibn Khattab's caliphate, which came much, much after the consummation with the Prophet ﷺ and Aisha.
Same way as certain things that aren't like wajib or things that aren't compulsory. It's not compulsory for someone to get married before the age of 18. It's not something that's like stopping my Islamic practices. So if I'm living in a country where it says 18, I allow for that, and I agree to that for that age to an extent where I don't believe girls in Western context have mental maturity. I agree with that, but I think the minimum at 18, I wouldn't necessarily agree with in all cases. It doesn't really affect me. We follow the law of the land. The law of the land says 18. I don't have qualms about that. I'm not saying that's. I mean, maybe to an extent I would. Like, I don't have qualms about keeping it at 18 or putting it at 16 or 17. I'm not advocating for it. I'm not advocating for it for my sake. But what I'm saying is this. Right? I'm saying that an optimal age range of someone consummating doesn't equate to someone. So just because it's not optimal, so younger than 18 or maybe older than 40, I don't feel that to be immoral. So I do agree. Maybe optimal is between 18 and 25. So maybe that is optimal. But that doesn't. That's my standard.
Fair enough. But you agree that age 18 is not. We're not just arbitrarily picking a number. There's actually good reason why we set it at 18. It's not arbitrary. Like
it is arbitrary. It is arbitrary. Like, what does he mean that it's not arbitrary? Because not every single 18-year-old. Okay, so according to him, if there's an 18-year-old who's like, for example, the shortest woman in India, she's like, I don't know, like in her late 20s or 30s or something. She's like 2 feet tall, right? She's like the size of like a five-year-old, even like a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old. She's 18. Would he be okay if he knew that if she was like, for example, she's older than 18, but if he knew that being physically being intimate with her would be harmful for her, right? Would he consider that wrong? He would say, yeah, I would. But, so then your principle goes out the window. So it's not just about the number 18 then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what he was trying to say, there's more to it than just like, oh, she reaches the age of 18, 100%. But the point he was trying to make here, he was trying to get me to say, okay, it's not arbitrary because most of the girls, this is like a safety net. Okay, most girls would at the end of their period, the end of their puberty would be at the ages of like, let's say 17 or 16. Let's put like 1 year extra and make it 18. And then he also mentions like, even the mental maturity aspect, and even the assumption that someone needs to complete puberty in order to be ready. Why do I have to grant that? Because the only reason he says puberty has to be completed is on the basis that there's less harm. If it's not completed, there'll be more harm, right? That's what he said. Now, that's an issue because if you're going to apply that same principle and apply to geriatric pregnancies, then you're gonna have an issue there, right? Because what are we gonna now outlaw geriatric pregnancies and geriatric giving? If we were to outlaw geriatric pregnancies as well, as Talib said, that would be ruling out like probably in the coming decades. They'll probably make up the bulk of pregnancies due to like everyone delaying marriage to like the age of 30, right?
Exactly. And geriatric pregnancies increase the risk of Turner syndrome and Down syndrome, all these quite debilitating issues by a considerable amount as you go over later on. So it's by no means that much better in terms of harm and the mother and child's outcomes when compared with those women who get involved who have younger pregnancies. So it's kind of a strange argument he's trying to place here. I don't know how he reconciles it.
Putting an exact number on anything on this topic, I see as in some sense arbitrary, but I see what you're saying. Putting an exact number, I don't agree putting an exact number.
So let's talk about the whole optimal issue, because you did say in one of your videos that you were talking about the Spartans, I believe, that they delayed that because it was more optimal for them to have children. But I mean, then you also now just mentioned like problems over 40. But what doesn't come with 40 is all of the mental issues. So there's a study called I put in my videos, Overlooked and Addressed, the narrative review of mental health consequences of child marriage. This was one of the papers I've been citing for years.
Where's the papers on mental health issues over 45?
Sorry, so even the paper mentions 45. What?
No, what I'm saying is, where have you looked at papers looking into possible mental health issues caused by getting married later? Have you looked into that?
Yes, divorce actually increases when you start marrying past the age of like 35. So it's like actually we do see an increase in mental issues
Okay,
related around that. Yeah. So, but no, not related to child marriage. It's far worse when it comes to child marriage. So they note numerous issues.
Far
that were
worse.
And this was a study that looked at, this was a review that looked at
I
various
mean, that's
studies in
just
34
an
countries.
assumption.
You're looking at Iran, Jordan, Turkey, US, Vietnam, Pakistan.
That's just like an assertion. Oh, it's far worse. Why is it
No, and
far
even,
worse?
even I'm willing to grant all that. It doesn't harm my case. I'm willing to grant all of these studies he's citing right now.
Bangladesh, Nigeria, Ethiopia. What they're finding is like early marriage increased depression risk by 2.77 times greater, even adjusting for substance abuse, unemployment, age, residence, other negative things. Those married early had higher rates of adjustment disorder associated with lower education, self-confidence, decision-making power, freedom and mobility. They demonstrated this in numerous countries, higher rates of suicidal thoughts as well, psychiatric disorders. And this is also just one. I have other studies like an umbrella study that looked at specifically at sexual interaction with children. Again, crazy amount of psychiatric disorders that are not going to result like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder from like a 40-year-old having sex. So again, there's no comparison in terms of mental disorders. Okay, it's not even just like it's optimal between 18 and 25. It's downright causing whole sorts of horrible issues prior to these ages for the children.
Yeah, I agree. There's a mismatch between, just let me finish my point. Just give me a sec to pull it up.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it was the glucose study. If I just pull it up. Give me 1 sec. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I'll pull up the study here, inshallah. So I'll go through the Gluckman study, which, like as I said before, you can find all the sources on my TikTok. Should be somewhere at the end. Yeah, so the Gluckman study goes through like this is the title, right? Evolution, development, and timing of puberty. It goes over how there's a mismatch between psychosocial maturity, which is the pink, and the age of monarchy, which would be the green, right? There's a mismatch when it comes to the present day, and I go through that. And because you see that mismatch and them not being able to conduct any sort of adulthood responsibilities because of this mismatch within Western contexts, then obviously you would assume, based upon that, if they can't work or function well as an adult, then obviously they wouldn't be able to get married because getting married is only for adults, right? So it's just common sense.
I might not have it on me. Actually, no, okay.
What's the name of
Actually, and another thing to point out before I continue as well, as I mentioned many times before, what is the metric that pre-modern societies were meant to use in order to determine when someone is mentally ready for consummation? They had to like neuroscan someone's brain, or like they didn't have that, right? And they didn't have this knowledge. So was everyone just doomed to like was everyone just waiting for this whole idea being presented by science with all this data that apparently the pre-modern age was completely like ignorant of? Were we just like waiting for our savior, like science? Yeah, science medad 200 years ago, 100 years ago, to give us all this like knowledge? Like, of course not. And also, it just puts into question like, what is the wisdom behind Jesus coming and not giving us the ability to actually determine what's moral and immoral on the aspect of marriage? When it comes to marriage here, like, what metric did Jesus give us? He didn't give us much, right? It just puts into question the wisdom with regards to even the application of Christianity, leaving like, it just leaves them in the dark for 1700 years where they're just doomed to conduct immoral marriages for 1700 years. It just seems crazy to me.
Yeah, it's funny that that you say that they're waiting for science to save them from the misguidance, but even within the scientific literature base, when you look at the brain scans, it says it's still in its infancy and it's not really a useful or helpful metric of brain development. So even on that point, it just completely crumbles.
By the way, the brain doesn't stop developing till you're 30. So I don't know what he's talking about. Like
I mentioned it later how it's like arbitrary. Like where do you say, okay, there needs to be this much development? Well, but even if we grant that, we got to talk about what about the people before us? Like, were they just like doomed? Like God just left them with no guidance for 1700 years? Like, come on.
So it's a Gluckman study where it shows the psychosocial maturation and how there's a mismatch in the modern age, right? That doesn't appear in the pre-modern times. So what the study says is, for the first time in our evolutionary history, biological puberty in females significantly precedes, rather than being matched, to the age of successful functioning as an adult. This is mentioned in figure 2. This mismatch between the age of biological and psychosocial maturation constitutes a fundamental issue for modern society. Our social structures have been developed in the expectation of longer childhood, prolonged education and training, and later reproductive competence. This emerging mismatch creates fundamental pressures on contemporary adolescents on how they live in society. Okay. So based on the fact that the conditions have set for girls to mature later, and the society's been constructed in such a way where we didn't have teenagehood prior to the Industrial Revolution. We didn't have this period where there's a delay on mental maturity that we do have now, right? Based on this, yeah, I agree. A girl in a Western context today doesn't have the ability to consent, and it will lead to mental problems. I agree with that.
So the study you're talking about is talking about psychosocial aspects, not neurological or brain development. Temporal lobes were still taking as long to develop 2,000 years ago as they are today. Okay, the prefrontal cortex still took as long to develop as it did today. When you're talking about psychosocial maturation, you're talking about incorporation into a society.
Sure. So my standard, because obviously we're not going to neuroscan people's brains, right, to determine things. I believe this is a very, very bad way to determine when someone's mentally mature, and I have stuff on me right now that goes into this, right? So this is like a misnomer that the development of brains or neuroscans is a good way to determine when someone's mentally mature. I look at it from a pragmatic sense, whether we can see that she can function or not within a particular context. As we can see today, that's not the case. Girls still pragmatically function as an adult today within a Western context at all, and we see that with a mismatch. Now, the study on my slide now is adolescent maturity and the brain, the promise and pitfalls of neuroscience research and adolescent health policy. And in 2 quotes I'm going to mention, it goes into how this is a very bad way to determine when someone actually is mentally mature. So 2 quotes I'm going to give is one, it comes off footnote 10. It says, although neuroscience has been called upon to determine adulthood, there is little empirical evidence to support the age of 18, the current legal age of majority, as an accurate marker of adult capacities. Less clear is whether neuroimaging at present helps to inform age-based determinations of maturity. Second quote, this is a subtitle, what we do not know about brain development in adolescence. In many respects, neuroimaging research is in its infancy. There is much to be learned about how changes in brain structure.
Yeah, before I get myself to just read the rest of that quote, let me actually share that source again. Yet again, just on my TikTok, everything's there. So this is what I was quoting from: adolescent maturity and the brain, the promise and pitfalls of neuroscience research and adolescent health policy. And this was the first quote. This was the second quote.
Function related to adolescent behavior. As of yet, however, neuroimaging studies do not allow a chronologic cut point for behavioral or cognitive maturity at either the individual or population level. The ability to designate adolescent as mature or immature neurologically is complicated by the fact that neuroscientific data are continuous and highly variable from person to person. So I don't think it's a good way to determine someone's ready.
Well, the good news is I didn't say it was just neuroscience. I also say psychological and sociological research. So I know there was a convergence there with development of the temporal lobes and the rise of mental disorders. So again, if children are engaging in sexual activity prior to when they're completing puberty, we see a rise in all sorts of mental disorders. So there's a convergence here. Now, if I was just making an argument from neuroimaging, sure, you have a point there. But I didn't do that. I said there's a convergence of different aspects of different areas: neuroscience, psychology, sociology, as well as historical precedents as well. So there's that going on there. So hold on, let me finish here. So, and again, the other thing to keep in mind here, though, is that again, we're also talking about physical development. So the widening of the hips is also important for bearing children. So again, if it was just neuroimaging, I might have to agree with you. But again, we can see studies done on child marriage. We can see them creating poor parenting skills and developing all sorts of mental issues. Through all of these aspects, we can see it's far better to wait 18, and having girls who can't consent engaging in marriage prior to that, they're going to be messed up. And that's just what the research shows.
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree with that convergence of the data. I already said that because they don't have. I mean, I think the least thing you should be taking into account is brain development. I don't think God would have us like researching into some link between neuroscience and someone's maturity level. I mean, of course, like there needs to be some minimum level of brain development for you to get there in terms of when someone's mentally mature. But the best indicator in the pragmatic sense would be when someone is seen to be functional as an adult within a particular society. And that's usually relation towards other adulthood responsibilities, as I mentioned before. But yeah, Talib, do you have anything to say on this topic specifically on like neuroscience?
I think everything that needs to be said has already been said. This is quite it's not really a point that really does too much. I think the study goes pretty much counter to his point. The other study talking about psychosocial detachment in recent years, I think also proves the point. There's not really much to talk about. I think it even in the literature it says like this is not a useful tool. So I think we can just move past it.
Yeah, and I'll just put that to the mismatch. If you're going to say this is like holistic view, we are taking into account sociological, so including psychosocial maturity, then yeah, there's a mismatch. So today I would advocate that it's not okay. So
well, let's talk about the mismatch though, because again, when the Gluckman study talks about psychosocial, it's talking about what they need to sort of like develop and live in society. So if you read Kim Phillips' book, the girls were not necessarily expected in the medieval period to get like a college education. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. They had to learn how to manage a household, and she says this wasn't even really at that point until like 16 or so, or around that same time. So when you have a psychosocial aspect, you only expect girls to manage households. You would expect them to be more ready to integrate in society at early ages. However, that doesn't mean their brains are ready for sex. That doesn't mean their bodies are ready for sex either. It just means they're able to sort of function in society, like do household chores kind of thing, earlier time periods, like help with the farming, perhaps, that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean they're ready to actually start bearing children, let alone engage in sex. So you can't take psychosocial and assume that's entirely full.
Wait, Dean, pause it. Yeah, but household chores. What if household chores that can also have traumatic effects on them? Right? Maybe doing chores has an effect on them. Maybe it harms them, right, from developing. What if that's the case? Why doesn't he talk about that?
Yeah, the whole mental harm thing, and he's
Yeah,
trying to
so
like I haven't even gotten the time, to be fair as well. I haven't even gotten the time to actually even see um the whole extent by which someone is considered to be uh mentally harmed from these marriages. I haven't even checked that, and I haven't even compared it with older marriages either. So right now I'm granting him everything. Even when I grant him everything, it doesn't harm my position
hmm.
because I already believe that girls today within Western contexts are not socially equipped to be engaging in adulthood responsibilities. So neither should they be getting married. I don't want to like shift the goalpost to physical negative consequences. We can get into that maybe after just after this statement. So yeah, my closing statement about it now would just be that if you're taking this holistic view of like taking into account everything and you're trying to draw like a correlation between all these aspects, I'll just say that yeah, the neuroscience itself as well as the social sciences and the cases where I also wanted to mention that in Islam our position isn't that every girl that just reaches puberty is automatically ready. There's some conditions that has to be met, and her father actually has to see that such a marriage at betrothal and early consummation gives her great benefit. So it's not the case that every young girl would actually have to do this. And Aisha, even may Allah be pleased with her, she was a great exception to be at the ages of 9, 10, and 11 to consummate because she was seen as like a prodigy. We even have like a hadith where she was betrothed to someone before the Prophet even, which was his name was Jubair, and Jubair's parents broke off the betrothal because they were scared that Aisha would convert Jubair because of how intellectual she was even at such a young age. She was learning, adaptive, and she managed to learn all things early, and it showed like the rest of her life. She was one of the greatest Islamic scholars, one of the highest narrators of a hadith. So yeah, like it's so complicated, and there's many variables to be taken into account, especially from a case-to-case basis. Not everyone's the same in mental maturity, and with all this, like all these variables that you did present, presenting it with just okay, we have a certain age bracket based on the evidence isn't definitive at all. I'll be satisfied taking my Quran and hadith as my definitive source of when marriage is allowed and what's the minimum ages, as I think like many Christians would be satisfied with. If you want to take science as even though it's based on induction, it's based on a lot of like different variables in this instance specifically, even that's entirely up to you. But I don't see it as convincing at all. For me, it's just my position.
So you want to take sources that are thousands of years old or on how to determine when girls are ready for marriage, not on modern scientific research, various sociological reports that have looked at various subjects and the effects, as well as all sorts of other factors as well, like in terms of hip development. You're more comfortable going off what people said thousands of years ago about medical aspects of girls, not what modern people have with all of our technology.
Yeah, so I do take the position that despite it being thousands of years ago, I have my tradition usurp. It takes precedence over science. I have a definitive source of information that gives me my morals, my ethics. We have an indefinitive source of information being like science, and you making these inferences and these correlations.
It's ironic because Toby Huff in his book on the Rise of Modern.
Yeah, so before we continue, this is a very, very important epistemic point being made here. The thing is with him, he has science come before
every single thing.
his book, right? He puts his aql before the naql, essentially, right? But even his aql is terrible.
He's putting like the science aql, like the scientist's aql over his own aql.
It's not even right aql, right? So what he's as I said, it's an epistemic point being made here. Like this is the difference, right? If he sees that,
go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, what I was gonna say was, if there's like something that is established within science, he'll have that inform his understanding of the Bible. It's meant to be the other way around. The Bible is meant to inform his understanding of the stuff he experiences in the world, the science he sees, and so on. Like when we see, for example, human ape ancestry, right? This whole theory science is presenting with its like presupposition of naturalism, when it gives like natural causes of where the origin of man most likely came from. Okay, well, that's a naturalistic explanation. We hold to a whole different epistemic framework. We believe metaphysical causes do exist, God exists, miracles exist, therefore Adam was a miraculous being that was given life to. With them, however, they hold to a whole different epistemic framework, and they bring natural evidences to come to this point. And what does this guy do? Well, he believes in human ape ancestry as well. He which is like
wow, what a surprise.
A lot of Christians actually would disagree with him on that. They would say it contradicts the Bible. I'm not even sure about the councils even. Maybe there's some council that talks about this as well, talking about how it's not compatible, but I haven't looked too much into it. But all I know is that this is a very important point to bring up, because what it shows is that he puts science before the Bible when the Bible is meant to take precedence, as I'm saying, which a lot of Christians, I think, especially apostolic Christians, would agree with me. Their tradition as well as their scriptures should come before any scientific or historical findings that they'll see that conflicts with that. This would be because it's a definitive, objective source of information that should be the lens by which they look at the world through, right? And
by the way, like since he's so like for science, right? Why doesn't he then deny miracles? How many virgin women can give birth? or how many people can split the sea in half, or how many donkeys can talk, how many like all these miracles, like who can walk on water, right? Which scientist says that this is plausible, right? How many of them say? So why doesn't he deny miracles as well, right? If you're so science and science matters, like if
Yeah,
he
I'm
were
not.
to debate an atheist, he would get destroyed, because the
Yeah,
atheist has
I mean,
more.
no, no. I think the atheist. The thing is, I think he'll concede to a lot of what the atheist says. I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not sure why he does hold to human ape ancestry, but obviously he wouldn't be holding to it prior to the scientific findings that came about within the past couple centuries, right? Prior to Darwinism, prior to this whole theory that
Yeah,
we
exactly.
we
Because
originate from like a human ape link.
his basically what he sees as, if you were to think of it as like a chart, first priority is science. That's the main thing. After that is the Bible. You know what I mean? And then after that is whatever else. So he doesn't even view that the Christianity you can derive morals from the Bible itself. You need to get something external like science to help you out,
So-
which is crazy.
What's a bit confusing to me is what part of his belief system does Christianity actually advise? Because it doesn't sound like any of this is like a Christian argument he's making. I'm not sure where the Christian argument starts and where it ends. I don't know if it's even started yet. You know what I mean? I'm a bit confused about this.
Yeah, as I tell him in the debate, bro, it feels like I'm debating an atheist. Honestly, actually, there was some atheists in this comment section that were saying that despite him being an atheist, he respects him because he's combating these sort of things, right? So, yeah, when you have like atheist glazers in your comment sections, and then you have like traditional Christians like condemning you, saying that you did terrible, that's a big red flag.
Modern sciences. This is exactly why modern sciences didn't rise in Islam. They used science to sort of help with Islamic law as much as possible, and then when they were done with it, they discarded it. So it's just kind of ironic. You don't allow for this type of advancement here that we see in Christendom, which is going to slow progress, and it's going to lead to harm done to girls. You just set these infallible aspects early on. You don't allow for like a virtue ethical development, which again we see it leads to harm for girls. We see child marriage rampant throughout the Islamic world.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we don't develop our ideas on what seems to be moral and emo. Like we have a set standard and we speak by it. So I'm gonna present other aspects because you wanted to bring up like hip development and so on, or like fistulas or like other physical complications, right? Give me a minute to pull these up.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, like this is
just to be
beautiful.
clear,
I'm
you
glad
actually
you mentioned this. Like, alhamdulillah, we have a static. Our morals are like firm. It's built upon tradition, and alhamdulillah, we don't budge. We don't worship science, right? We don't have this weird epistemology where science is like everything. Every scientific stat that comes out, I keep on changing my morality. We don't have this. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad that you mentioned this.
You just admit that your religion is a religion for the 7th century and not for the modern era, because we have gone so much further, and we have Christendom, which allows for the 2 books. You're basically admitting that, hey, we have one religion that allows for advances in science to help us better understanding our ethics. Even Galileo's own opponent said, if they were wrong and Galileo was right, that just means they didn't interpret scripture properly. So they allow for this kind of development in terms of science to better understand the scriptures, to better understand nature, to better understand the body. It's very terrifying to say we should just stick with what the ethics were in the 7th century and not allow any scientific development to help us advance and better understand that.
No, it's like I'm going to close it off with this. Then we can get into like this harms. Alhamdulillah, yeah, we say like the companions, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they gave us the best morals to emulate, which did come from 7th century.
So why doesn't that manifest in reality? Why do we see when studies when Christianity and Islam are compared? When studies when they compare Christianity and Islam, we see Islam deteriorates and actually slows progress down in terms of like political aspects as well as ethical aspects. I mean, I've got so much studies when they looked at both of them. Islam slows progress; it doesn't help it.
Okay, if you Islamic finish, because I like finish now. So, as I was saying, so when it comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions, alhamdulillah, we take them as the moral exemplars of our religion. Despite them coming 1,000+ years ago, they're still the moral exemplars. We always go back to them, back to the Quran and the Sunnah and the pious way of the righteous predecessors. I mean, taking your position, you're going to have to say that the disciples were wrong on moral issues, despite them being taught by Jesus.
Yes, that's the whole point of the Gospels. Peter denied Jesus. Of course, he was wrong in certain ways.
No,
I mean, there's a story I believe.
In more aspects being taught by Jesus. So there's a presupposition amongst like people from apostolic churches where they say that the early church, they are presenting what Jesus actually would have thought to be moral or immoral based upon what he taught. And based on that, they would say they are the forerunners of the religion. The early church, the disciples, they teach us our morals and ethics, not modern liberal scientists.
On theology, they're who we go to. But again, we have to go to scripture, which we believe is inspired by the Holy Spirit. But again, you just read the Gospels, you see the disciples messing up all the time. I mean, one of the disciples betrayed Jesus. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. They all abandoned Jesus right before the crucifixion. We don't have this idea that they're like perfect. Jesus worked through imperfect people to do great things. This is a huge Christian idea that you go through the Old Testament prophets. God is always working through imperfect people. David messes up. Moses messes up. Abraham messes up. That's a Christian idea. We don't look at the apostles as if they're morally perfect. We look at Jesus, who's the only morally perfect one. We don't even consider Paul to be morally perfect.
sorry, that's not my claim. What I'm claiming is they're the exemplars in what they taught. Sure, they can do mistakes, they can commit like sins, of course, but in terms of what they taught, they're the moral exemplars and the moral standard for what we go to determine what is moral and immoral. So
Not Jesus. We go to Jesus, not Peter.
Just Jesus, no, the disciples, they could make mistakes in morality, sure. In what they're teaching, even for 1,000+ years up until the modern age, where we have to determine what's right now. Sure. Okay.
Outside of Scripture, they can teach. They can make outside of teaching what's in Scripture. They can make fallible errors. It's always been Christian idea.
Sure. Even in regards to teaching morality, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, that's a crazy point, right? We'll stop it there. So, the consensus teachings of the disciples and early church fathers for 1,700 years on a moral issue, not just like a fringe moral issue. This is regarding marriage, the conditions by which a marriage is deemed to be lawful or not. They're wrong, and they're teaching an immorality. I don't see. I mean, I could probably find some council that's like binding on Catholics or Eastern Orthodox where this contradicts this whole idea. But I mean, just on an intuitive sense, would you think that disciples would be wrong on any moral issue despite them learning right next to Jesus for years?
I found it a bit funny because it sounds like he's arguing against Christianity here, man. The way he's speaking. Sounds like he's the one against Christianity, the way he's talking about the disciples, man. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, this can be even used like as an argument against them. Be like, okay, well, I talked about this with GGK yesterday. The whole idea of like, you know them by their fruits. This is like a way to determine if someone's a true prophet or false prophet. Jesus talks about this. He gives like the parable of like a good tree and a bad tree, and a good tree produces good fruits. So you know, like a true prophet by their good fruits or good actions. I think St. Augustine talks about this in his commentary, talking about how fruits here symbolizes actions. Well, if we're meant to judge people by their fruits, and the disciples in the early church are all teaching pedophilia to be okay according to him, well, we should be judging them all as like false prophets by that definition. If people are going to apply the same principle of, okay, bad fruits, and bad fruits encompasses getting married at young ages. Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, well, your prophet, he married at a young age, therefore he has bad fruits, therefore he's a false prophet. I can apply the same thing to your early church then. Your early church taught that young marriages at 9, 10, 11, 12 were permissible. They taught this to be part of something that doesn't annul marriages. Use the same criteria Jesus gave and the whole moral framework you're coming with, and apply that to them and deem them to be false prophets, false teachers, false apostles. You're not going to do that though, because you just have a tunnel vision idea on what you want to apply this to, and you got cognitive dissonance, not wanting to apply it to other areas where it would be problematic for you. So it's just being selective here, right? So yeah, it could even be used as an argument against them.
Okay, sure. Let's get into the next one, because I mean, you brought up, I believe, physical detriments, which I disagree as being as a sort of issue. Okay, so if you just make your case.
What do you want me to say?
So like physical detriments that come about through like young marriages, what's the claim here exactly?
Because the hips is not fully widened and the human head is big. So when you have a hard time pushing that out, you can develop things like obstetric fistulas, maternal death. Also, you see low birth weight coming out from teen marriages, so the infants don't even develop properly. So yeah.
This is false. What is he talking about? When you're at the final trimester of puberty, when you're hitting menstruation, your hips are it's already developed. It's pretty much
developed. It's like at the age of menarche, you've reached like 80 to 85% of like
exactly your bone structure is done. You're not gonna grow. The only thing that changes is you develop fat around those regions, but that's it.
And then it widens just a bit more, but it's not even that much. And also another thing to take into account, there's going to be about 9 months where the girl's pregnant as well. So it's not like she's going to be impregnated at the time of her menarche. It's 9 months after her menarche, actually, right?
Yeah, and look, and from what I know, the last stage, you don't grow that much at all. Like, I don't think you grow at all. Once you hit that last stage, last initial stage, the only thing that develops are fat around the body regions, right? That's it. So
yeah, after menarche. After menarche, the pelvis just widens another maybe 15 to 20% max, right? And there's still fat developing and so on. Like, really, like the point is that once you reach the age of menarche, like you've basically reached almost full physical maturation. You just got like a bit left to mature. And then even that bit left, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think even that bit left, the little bit of maturity that, not maturity, sorry, the little bit of development that's left may kind of explain why there's a discrepancy in some complications. But even if he wanted to take that point of view and argue that If you look at geriatric pregnancy, it's not even a question of which one is worse or not. Like, it's quite clear which one is worse. So even if he takes that stance on it, that, hey, you know, there's this issue associated with that little bit more development. I mean, I don't think that's really a strong argument.
Low birth weight is a huge issue for early teen marriages. I can pull up this one study here if you want. It actually has an interesting thing I want to read in it. So the study is Economic Impacts of Child Marriage, a review of the literature. And one of the things they say in this, so let me just read: the combination of girls being physically immature and the lack of proper medical care during pregnancy and childbirth puts adolescent mothers at a higher risk of complications during gestation and delivery, including prolonged and obstructed labor, fistula, and death. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth are the second leading cause of death among adolescent girls, 15 to 19 globally, with nearly 70,000 dying each year, according to the World Health Organization.
Sure. So what are the causes for these like obstetric fistulas and these complications, as it says?
They mentioned fistulas, yeah.
Yeah, but what's the causes for them? What do they say exactly?
So fistula is when you tear in the birth canal.
I know what fistulas. I'm asking what are the causes of these fistulas developing? What are they
Trying to deliver a child.
No, what are the causes that heighten the likelihood of these fistulas occurring?
I'm not sure what you're asking now.
Okay,
So you need to,
what I'm saying is the causes of these fistulas to come about.
what causes fistulas to come about? Again, it's trying to have.
There, I actually got a phone call. So at that point, what I was asking him was, oh damn, no way, that I accidentally misclicked. Okay. Do you guys remember what minute it was just at? Was it?
It was past
1:17?
minute 30, right?
Was it past 1 hour and 30 minutes?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I think.
Play it.
But because generally speaking, when they see younger marriages or older marriages coming about and pregnancies coming about, they see these harms actually occurring throughout these sort of outlying pregnancies.
Okay, give me a second. I can just check real quick. 1 second. Yeah. So basically, I got a phone call at that moment for about a minute. But what I was trying to say was, from what he had read, if I might just replay what he read as well. What he read actually said that it was due to them being of a young age, as well as them not having medical facilities accessible to them, which he actually read out when he was reading the causes of fistulas.
And another thing is, another risk factor for the issue is being older in age as well. So it's not just younger; it's also older age pregnancies increase risk, which he conveniently leaves out.
Maybe I'll I did mention it in the debate somewhere, and I'll pull up the study inshallah once it is brought up. Okay, I think I found where I left off.
A great enough extent. Actually, as you were reading, which I wanted you to pick up on, which was the medical access they actually had. It actually says so the medical access that they have plays a big role.
Let me replay when you read it.
You can develop things like obstetric fistulas, maternal death. Also, we see low birth weight coming out from teen marriages, so the infants don't even develop properly. So yeah, low birth weight is a huge review of the literature. And one of the things they say in this, so let me just read: the combination of girls being physically immature and the lack of proper medical care during.
Yep, right there. Did you hear that? The combination of these two factors. Let me just play it again.
Impacts of child marriage, a review of the literature. And one of the things they say in this, so let me just read: the combination of girls being physically immature and the lack.
The combination of girls being physically immature and the lack
proper medical care.
Proper medical care. Now, obviously, I'm going to mention in the debate, you would expect people of younger ages to have less access to medical care. This wouldn't apply for geriatric pregnancies more than likely. People who are getting impregnated at those older ages are less likely to be of a low socioeconomic status. You're almost guaranteed at these young ages within these particular societies to find that they would have minimal access due to like maybe distance from the hospital or lack of medical care or just lack of money generally that would enable them to have access to these medical cares that are very hard to actually find within these particular contexts that the studies have been conducted in. It's been conducted in Mali, Senegal, where else? I think Nigeria and Cameroon, very like just places in Africa where they have limited access, generally speaking. So obviously, when you talk about a certain subgroup like young girls below the age of 15 getting impregnated, they're going to be people with lower economic statuses, because the people who would be of a higher socioeconomic status would would want their children to have a delay in maturity and get them married off later on after they actually get an education, because only those who could afford to delay maturity would delay maturity, most likely within these like societies.
During pregnancy and childbirth puts adolescent mothers at a higher risk of complications during gestation and delivery, including prolonged and obstructed labor, fistula, and death. Complications of pregnancy and childbirth are the second leading cause of death among adolescent girls, 15 to 19 globally, with nearly 70,000 dying each year, according to the World Health Organization.
Sure. So what are the causes for these like obstetric fistulas and these complications, as it says?
They mentioned fistulas, yes.
Yeah, but what's the causes for them? What do they say exactly?
Trying to deliver a child. Now.
Okay, sorry. He says that when the conducted in camp isn't so well. I agree that has a phone call. So yeah, sorry, I've got a like important phone call. Sorry. Yeah, so
You need to go soon?
No, I don't have to go. I just have to take that phone call. So what I was saying was the causes of these fistulas isn't reduced to them being younger. I agree that has a point. Like the study that you cited yourself even says that older age plays a role. Right? Older age actually plays a role in developing fistulas. One thing, right? Now the problem is these high levels of fistulas, obstetric fistulas, isn't solely because their pelvises haven't grown to a great enough extent. Actually, as you were reading, which I wanted you to pick up on, which was the medical access they actually had. It actually says in what you just quoted. So the medical access that they have plays a big role. When these studies are conducted, they're conducted in Cameroon, Nigeria, like Mali, right? Now these developing countries, you would assume that these younger girls, they would have less access to medical care because they don't have free healthcare. They probably live further away from the hospitals and so on. They would have to probably give birth in their houses, which is mentioned in that study that you cited in your TikToks. So yeah, it plays a big role, and that's partially why these obstetric fistulas do develop. Even the development of these obstetric fistulas, they're quite low from what I saw. I think it was 0.18%, and that number would have to go down if we did take into account what I just said regarding their limited access from younger ages to medical facilities because they're coming from lower socioeconomic statuses. So taking that into account, if we had an actual study where they all have proper access to medical care, I think that younger girls would have a similar rate of obstetric fistulas as older women getting impregnated.
Define older.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Todd? The point I was making, because I spoke to you about that prior to the debate, right?
Yeah. I think that it's not out of the question to think that those who are having pregnancies at older ages would have many complications as well. And I think just in general, when you look at it from the perspective of geriatric versus younger pregnancies, this whole idea that one is immoral and another one isn't, I don't think it's something you can support given what we see. And I think it's quite strange that he picked an article that looks at the younger age ranges but then doesn't also show the older age ranges, so we can see across the board what the harms tend to be like. And I'm sure there's plenty of literature to show that. So I'm not sure why that's not being shown, but I think we do find some you do find some literature that actually shows things like chromosomal abnormalities, things like Down syndrome, things like needing cesarean sections because of issues with labor. All these sorts of things actually do go up. So yeah,
and so I'm gonna bring up the study on obstetric fistulas, but before I bring this up, I believe there was something else I wanted to have a look at. I think it was the geriatric pregnancies that you mentioned. So I mentioned later on the maternal mortality rate and the Down syndrome, right? So, okay, this is the first one. The first source talks about it being 6.8 times higher, while younger pregnancies that he was mentioning are 4 times higher. So the likelihood of maternal mortality is actually heightened more. And this is taken from the US. His study was taken from Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken, or some parts of South America. Now, here's another one. They are 42 times, 1 in 35, 42 times more likely to give birth to a baby with Down syndrome. And the percentage here is just about like 2%, right? And as you can see, like the ages of 20, 30, 35, 40, it's obviously it gets progressively worse as you go on. Just to pull up the fistula point now. Yeah, so this is what he referenced, right? Risk factors for obstetric fistula, a clinical review. And it talks about how illiteracy among the obstetrical fistula patients ranged from 19 to 96%. So what does that show you? Most of them would have been of a low socioeconomic status because they were illiterate, right? Among the obstetric fistula patients, 57.6 to 94.8% of women try to deliver at home. Why are they trying to deliver at home? Why aren't they close to a hospital? Why aren't they giving birth in a hospital? Why did they initially start giving birth at home? Well, obviously, it's because of their limited access to hospitals, and were secondarily transferred to the health facility. However, 9% to 84% of the patients delivered at home. So there's still a substantial percentage that still stayed at home despite them giving birth, meaning they probably had no choice at all. Like they had no ability at all to even get to a hospital.
So what's the risk factor for these obstetric fistulas? Well, you get death of tissues because of the obstruction, and the biggest problem is the length of labor. And if they're having pregnancies at home, they don't have these medical facilities, it's going to increase the length of that labor and increase the risk of obstetric fistulas. Like it's quite clear that this is a big issue with just quoting this statistic. You know what I mean?
And it says here, even it's partially explained by them being younger, right? Due to their anatomic immaturity, and it goes on to say even a partial explanation for sorry, I accidentally scrolled down. Okay, sorry, it's gonna take forever. Anyways, yeah. While I get this up, it says here also it's partially explained by older age as well. So should be able to get that up soon. It's not really a fair comparison as well because there's no reason to think these older women would necessarily be from a lower socioeconomic status. However, with younger marriages, you wouldn't happen to see younger marriages happening with people who are more well off within these societies, like in Cameroon and Senegal, Mali, and so on. So yeah, it says here they include older age as a risk too. So it says here the lack of prenatal care, early marriage, young age at delivery, and older age, and lack of family planning, right? So of course, there'll be more likely to be lack of family planning or lack of prenatal care if someone's getting married at a younger age. So these are like compounding stuff like happening one after the other due to them being of a lower socioeconomic status. And it's not necessarily a causation here, but just like these things being correlated together. And to say that young age here is particularly the most aggravating factor at play here, I don't see any indication within like the study that this is the case. Of course, as a role to play, and maybe the statistics aggravate that due to like the other factors that I mentioned that play a role. However, older age, if we had them in the same level of socioeconomic status, the same level of they're giving birth within the homes and not in hospitals and all these things, I'm sure it would be similar, and I wouldn't expect it to be a massive disparity between younger pregnancies and the amount of rate there is for fistulas compared to people of older ages, if it was mitigated for like all these factors.
It's multifactorial, that's for sure. And if you allow for parity between those factors, I think we get a much better picture of what's going on. And I think that picture would align more with the point of view that you were putting forward, which is that there wouldn't be too much of a difference between pregnancies in those two age groups in question.
What age range?
40 plus.
Okay, yeah, 40 plus. It's very harmful for a woman to try to have a child. No, because you're talking about a consenting adult. They can agree to it when they've been aware. However, I will add this. Hold on, I will add this.
You're making the question because
No, not because you're talking. No, because you're talking about a child who can't consent. If you take a let's go higher. Let's go 13-year-old. You marry her and you have a child. She didn't consent to that. She doesn't know what's happening. Okay, a 40-year-old can't consent. Now, I will say, if a 40-year-old is told by her doctor, "You don't have children, you'll likely die," and she does anyway, that is immoral because her family is relying on her, and you don't put yourself at risk when your family needs you.
That is something in Islam we agree with. Yes.
Okay.
But even that is like a complete misrepresentation. A lady that gets impregnated past the age of 40 rarely gets told that, you have a high risk of death here and you're going to leave your family and all this stuff. Rarely, like geriatric pregnancies don't cause mortality at such a high rate. Like that doesn't usually happen at all.
I can make that admission for the 40-year-old, but for the 13-year-old, it's even worse because you have someone who can't even consent, and you're putting her through a process.
But let's say you grant my position, because right now, obviously, like I'm giving my outlook on how I deal with these statistics, right? If you grant my assumption that they can consent, these young women can actually consent, what's the symmetry breaker?
What's the what?
What's the symmetry breaker between the two? What's the thing that distinguishes one as moral and immoral?
Well, you're assuming that somehow a 13-year-old is an adult. That changes the entire game.
Yeah,
So
but
you're just
like,
basically saying, like, what if I was already right and a 13-year-old was an adult? Okay, then yeah, a 13-year-old is an adult, but the 13-year-old isn't an adult, so it doesn't change anything.
Sure, but the point being that the principle here isn't really much on harm. It's more so consenting to that harm. But when you present it in your videos, you're making it seem like this is a death sentence or that there's some sort of harm that's restricted to younger marriages. When in fact, like older marriages, geriatric pregnancies, which is pregnancies above age 35, they're 6.5 times more likely to have mothers dying, right?
Mhm.
And that's a lot. That is higher even than younger marriages from the stats you provided, which is 4 times more likely. And okay, it's not even a good comparison also because the study that you brought from Venezuela, the study I brought was from the US. The second point would be that regarding complications also, the likelihood of a woman giving birth to a baby that has Down syndrome is 42 times more likely, which is in 1 in 35. 1 in 35 pregnancies, which is about 2.5% of pregnancies coming back from geriatric ones.
And as I said in my debate with Daniel Hakikichu, if a doctor tells a woman over 40 not to have a child, she should not have a child.
Yeah, but this the statistics I'm bringing you isn't even that high, to be fair. Like, it is 2.5%, but I don't think that would necessarily stop someone from having a pregnancy above age 45. Might be something that they think about, but it's not necessarily something moral. Now, so just on the aspect of harm, going back to what I was saying before with the early church, they would have the knowledge that like older pregnancies or younger pregnancies have these harms, not because I'm bringing isolated cases, but because generally speaking, when they see younger marriages or older marriages coming about and pregnancies coming about, they see these harms actually occurring throughout these sort of outlying pregnancies. Despite that, what I'm going to say is they had that knowledge, they witnessed all these infant mortalities, all these maternal mortalities, all of these morbidities that come about from these pregnancies, and despite that, they're using the same harm principle you're using, and they're saying it's not immoral. But you're saying they're saying that they're saying it's not immoral, but you're saying it's immoral. Now, what gives you the authority? Because what gives you the authority to actually say that the harm or the risk is so high that it should be considered immoral? But for 1700 years, these early church members don't have the authority.
Well, I kind of want to ask. He's willing to put a floor to the age. Like, what's the lowest level? Is he willing to put a ceiling? Because he thinks 18 is an arbitrary. Can he put a ceiling on what age they can stop getting pregnant at? I'd love to say that. Does science tell him what the ceiling is?
No, not really. And what he'll say is, is that that's not even his main point. So, like, I don't know, man. Like, even a 9 or 10-year-old that menstruates, her, how do you say it? Her ability to give birth and the risk she has in regards to like physical harms would be less than a geriatric pregnancy, right? So I don't know. Like, I don't know where he would put that like benchmark, but he's trying to emphasize really now like the mental harms, despite the fact that, as I'm going to show now, his first video he made on this topic, like condemning child marriage and saying, oh, it's so harmful and you shouldn't be doing it and it causes way too much harm. He shows this. Yeah, he definitely pivoted. Definitely pivoted, because he made no mention of this in his first video on TikTok. So if we check here.
It's actually when the ages of like 14 to 16. So this is completely false and will lead to a lot of harm. Research shows if you're 15 or under, you're 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than if you were 16 or older. You're also
He's being so deceptive with these. Yeah, so he mentions that, right? Maybe it's not the best for me to pull up my. Give me 1 second. I should have pulled up his actual video. Give me 1 sec. Okay. Yeah, so he definitely did pivot. Initially, his point was one of like merely physical harm, and he meant like zero mention of mental harms. It's only when I mentioned geriatric pregnancies and how there's like we can see here that geriatric pregnancies cause more physical harm, where he shifted the goalpost and he mentioned how consent is needed, right? So I got the video up now. Okay.
14 to 16.
Yeah.
So this is completely false and will lead to a lot of harm. Research shows if you're 15 or under, you're 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than if you were 16 or older. You're also more likely to develop a fistula from childbirth. Research shows it's best for you to wait for the hips to fully widen before you start bearing children, which isn't complete until the ages of 15 to 17. And this is why we don't legally grant the status of adulthood until the age of 18. It's the following year after puberty is complete for most people. It just makes sense legally. And of course,
okay, there we go. So his reason on justifying that the minimum age should be 18 is because of these physical harms. Where did he mention mental? Where did he mention consent? Where did he mention the ability to consent here? He doesn't mention it. The only justification he brings in his initial video is the physical harms. I debunk that. I show him geriatric pregnancies are even more harmful. Are you going to say that we should legislate against pregnancies above the age of 40? Then he shifted the goalpost.
By the way, if harm is he's concerned about harm and mental harm and whatever, wouldn't the law of 18 be also immoral? Because he just said most people by that age receive go through puberty, right? That's his claim. But if he's so worried about harm, shouldn't the age of consent be like 25, just in case some people don't hit puberty after before 18?
It puts into question, like, that's why I told him, like, any age number is kind of arbitrary to me. I don't think an age number is a good way to determine when someone's ready.
Yeah, make it 30. Why not 30? Because by that time you can be sure that every single person has reached puberty, right? At least every single person. So why not 30? So I really don't get this guy.
Knowing this.
Okay. Lot there. Let me respond to everything. Let's start with the church. Okay, for one thing, no, we do see people in the medieval period saying that it should be delayed because the seed is too weak, as I mentioned before. Okay, you're assuming that a lot of the early church fathers were writing up like medical treatises. That's not what they were focusing on. So again, you have non-medical experts writing mostly on non-medical subjects. And again, we see from research like Brent Shaw that Christians were marrying later. So this wasn't like happening around them like crazy. The church was not seeing in like the 300s 12-year-olds getting married and expected to have a child at age 12 left and right. You're assuming this was so common they should have wrote about it. So your argument from silence doesn't even work there. Now again, what gives me the authority on this? Again, I've never said that just because there's one or two harm aspects involved that therefore is wrong. I've given multiple reasons. Mental development, engaging in one of my biggest issues with child marriage is not even childbearing, it's engaging a child in sexual behavior, because that messes them up mentally, as I told you earlier in this live. And then you also have on top of that the complications from the physical aspects. So unlike someone over 40, you don't have the excessive mental issues where they're going to develop psychiatric disorders because you're having them engage in sex early on when their temporal lobes are still developing, and they develop all these sort of disorders from that. The physical aspects are on top of the fact that you're putting a young child who can't consent, who doesn't know what's going on, and expecting her to bear a child at an early age where she's going to be frightened, where she's not going to really understand what's going on. Then you're expecting her to raise that child when she's not even mentally developed. You're going to have, everyone loses with this, because you're going to be raising children, you're going to have children raising children, and they're not going to actually have, and this is what the studies I have actually say, the children don't get developed properly out of the ones that come out of child marriages, because they don't develop the right social skills. They don't have as much intelligence as women in their 20s raising children or in their 30s. So it's a collection of issues. It's not just one or the other things. The biggest thing is going to be the mental issues. And then on top of that, after their children, where they have a high risk of death or developing a fistula, I mean, you're just compounding factor after factor after a while.
Sure. So just move on from this point, because I got your perspective now. I just want to ask one question before moving on. So if we do remove consent, just to clarify, and we just have harm between the two, you would be, if we have consenting in a hypothetical, consenting 12, 13-year-olds, and we have consenting 45, 40-year-olds. And
He didn't want to answer this for a good 5 minutes. Anyways, yeah, I'll play it.
Have the harm principle here to determine whether it's moral or not. You're saying that it's, so yeah, it's either both are moral or both are immoral right now, because we have just harm being the variable here and not consent within this hypothetical.
Okay, are you including in the harm the mental aspects I mentioned?
I'm saying, yeah, as I said, like the assumption here is if you would assume that they can consent, there wasn't that variable in play. Because we're not talking about harm, we talked about mental maturity before. I don't want to combine the two. We're talking specifically here harm as a point. Without these mental damages, a 12-year-old or 13-year-old having relations and giving birth, would that be considered morally okay, putting to the side mental maturity?
Putting aside mental maturity. So,
yeah,
I think
so you have a consenting person under age that has a body of a 12-year-old, that's a body of a person who just reached menarche. They have just reached menarche, putting mental maturity to the side and consent to the side. This is a consenting person. They have a body of a 12-year-old that just reached menarche. Is that immoral for us?
So this is a very complicated hypothetical that I'm trying to fully grasp here. So in your view, a 12-year-old is what would be like mature as like an 18-year-old?
What I'm saying here is we have a 12-year-old body of a person who is consenting in my hypothetical. Would that be immoral for them to actually give birth?
No, because again, they're just simply not ready physically for that. I mean, just all around. You're still going through puberty. You should not expect to have children until you complete puberty.
Physically speaking.
Because again, the mental aspects, the physical aspects, why would you
you're bringing mental aspects? I guess my hypothetical.
But you
hypothetical
said
is
the body of the 12-year-old. The body of the 12-year-old includes the brain.
Yeah, but I know, but I did like clarify that a 12-year-old body for relations. However, we're putting to the side right now whether she can mentally consent or not. That's a dispute you have. Sure. Now, assuming I do prove that to you, and I do provide a convincing case for you that she can consent, we have a 12-year-old here that has body of a 12-year-old that can consent in this hypothetical. Body harm alone. Is it immoral for her to have relations and give birth?
Body of a 12-year-old.
Yep. And she's able to give
birth. So she's like she has the mind of an 18-year-old. Then is what you're saying.
Not even 18, but a mentally mature person that can give consent.
Okay, then it would be an 18-year-old.
Sure, whatever you want to say, that's fine.
Okay, so
someone that has the brain, someone that has the mental capacity to give consent, so you have to have a mental capacity of consenting according to your view being an 18-year-old. Sure.
There are genetic disorders. So I'll give you a example. There's like a girl who's got a genetic disorder where she like she's got like the body of like a 10-year-old, or something like that. Yeah,
that's pretty much what I'm giving.
Okay, yeah. Doctors have said someone in that position should not even be having children. So like doctors say the same thing like a 12-year-old and a 40-year-old. You shouldn't have children at this point.
But
so like
I'm asking a moral question. A moral question.
Okay, so can she consent? Again, I will go back to the same thing I said about 40-year-old. If the doctor says if you have a child, there's a very high likelihood you'll die.
A doctor won't be saying that. Another time a doctor won't be saying that. It's very exceptional. A 40-year-old most of the time would not have so much risk that a doctor would advise that. That's an exceptional case. A lot of the time they wouldn't be advising that around the age of 40 to 45. Now, the age of 40 to 45 has more bodily harm than one who's just reached the menarche being 12 to 13. So now address this. If you're going to be consistent, you're going to have to say more for a 40 to 45-year-old to give birth.
Yeah, it's really weird, Talib. how often do, because you mentioned this point, you kept mentioning this point of like, yeah, if someone says you're not able to give birth, you shouldn't be giving birth because of the fact that you might actually die from the pregnancy. How often is that actually from like young and older pregnancies? Like, what percentage would a doctor actually go ahead and advise that? Really, like, are we looking at 5%, 10%? Like what are we looking at here?
In terms of percentages, I can't really give you a actual figure, but what I can say is that it would change from doctor to doctor, the opinion, and there would be no doctor's going to go up to you and tell you can't have a pregnancy. They'll outline the risks, and they'll give you an idea of what exactly it entails. What kind of complications can you assume will happen? What are the risks? What would this look like for your child in the future? You know, these are the sorts of things they tell you. But in terms of like the judgment, at the end of the day, the judgment's up to you. It's not, they didn't make a moral, you know, it's a bit funny. He's waiting for a doctor to make a moral judgment about this. We're talking about a moral judgment here, not a doctor's opinion on the matter. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think that he's conflated two things that I don't think should be considered the same.
And even for a doctor to say that there's a high risk here for maternal mortality or these sort of things, I wouldn't think a 2 or 3 percentage would be like that high. And as we saw from the statistics, it was, I think, 0.18% for girls. That was the rate, and that was like for girls in like a developing country, right? It wasn't.
Yeah.
They didn't have access to medical facilities, and for geriatric pregnancies, even though it was 6.5 times greater than the optimal range, it was still low, like at 0.3%, right? So when would we actually see a doctor advising, hey, like there's going to be high levels of risk here? Not often, man. Like these are very exceptional cases.
I mean,
You're gonna say that for your
especially
example.
when people are starting to get married much later, a
Mhm.
lot of people are going to start deferring the times when they get pregnant and things like that. A lot of women, and there's going to be a point where just people are going to start having pregnancies at the more suboptimal times, like he says. You know, is he going to consider them to be immoral at that point? Like, I don't know. This is a very problematic thing to say when people are getting women are starting to get pregnant at a much later age now.
Mhm.
I already said that. I already said if a 40-year-old goes to a doctor and says, I want to have a child, and the doctor says, if you have a child, there's a high likelihood you could die. You'll either husband.
That's exceptional. I showed you the statistics. I didn't show you, but I showed you in my TikTok video where it's 6.5 times more likely for a woman between ages of 40 to 45 to have maternal mortality. Now, this maternal mortality is very, very low still. It's still at about 0.2%, 0.25%, I believe. A doctor, generally speaking, will not be advising against a woman giving birth based upon this, or based upon them giving birth to someone that has some genetic complications, such as like Down syndrome. These are very low percentages. You're talking 0. something, 1% or 2%. These are very low. Generally speaking, a lady giving birth, a geriatric pregnancy at these older ages, they have more complications than a younger girl giving or having a pregnancy, which is like around the age of menarche. Now, to my question, a 12-year-old who just reached the age of menarche that is going to give birth, is that immoral for her to do so if she does have the mental capacity to consent?
Okay. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what you're asking here. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to get clarification here. Okay, you're trying to say someone? So basically, someone who's got the mind of an, let's say, 18-year-old, but they have the body of a 12-year-old.
Wait,
can they
I just wanted to ask.
Or you factor in the fact they've been.
Pause it real quick. Even just to add to what Talib was saying, right? Yeah, like even at the optimum age of having a child, there's something called like birth trauma. So people can actually develop PTSD or some sort of like it's called childbirth related PTSD. So is he gonna say pregnancy now is immoral? If he wants to stay consistent with that principle of physical and mental harm, yeah, pregnancy can cause that as well. So I really don't. This type of like his principle, it's so bizarre. It's not applicable in reality. It's very strange.
Warned that they have a higher risk of death.
They won't be warned with that. What's the risk of death? Go ahead. What's the percentage?
So what the studies have looked at is like 15 and younger, and so it's going to get progressively worse as they get younger. So what the studies have said is it's 4 times higher, like as I cited.
And that 4 times higher is what percentage? It's 4 times more likely for me to die from a shark than to die from a lightning strike. So what? Give me a percentage.
What do you okay, yeah, 4 times more likely. So I believe it was like 18.5 out of 10,000 versus like 4 or so, or 5 or so. Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head, but this is irrelevant to my point here.
0.185%. No,
and that has a lot to do with medical technology because we know that infant and maternal mortality rates were higher in time periods without
that'll apply for everyone. That'll heighten the risk for all of them. That doesn't
but those percentages are going to, again, they're going to be exponential bigger for the different groups because of the lack of medical technology as well.
Give me a percentage to work with.
what specifically?
Because the study you gave is 0.185%. Let's increase that. 0.8%. That's exponentially greater. 1%, 2% even. It's still exponentially greater, but still extremely low.
What are you trying to get at here?
Okay, what I'm getting at is we have a higher risk of mortality rates for younger people and older people. Now, sure, the risks today are going to be extremely low at 0.185 or 0.2 or 0.3%, depending on the ages, because of the progress of medical facilities. Now, the problem I'm going to have with is you saying that a girl, a 12-year-old giving consent, has these major physical harms that could potentially come about, when we know that there's a very, very small risk. It's 0.something%. But even if I grant you that people back then in the pre-modern world had increased risk, and I give you a 1% probability, I give you a 2% probability, or a 3% probability that there's going to be infant mortality going about, these aren't risks that would justify a doctor to tell someone, hey, you probably shouldn't give birth because of these complications. Give me a percentage that would justify such an advice.
Okay, well, yeah, I agree with you. But then again, that's not the reason doctors are so against child marriage. It has a lot more to do with the mental aspects of the raising of children.
Again, I don't want you to shift. I want you to just hypothetical.
Again, your hypothetical is missing the whole point, though.
Okay, is your argument solely the mental harms, or is it mental and physical harms?
It's a compounding thing. Mental is going to be the main issue.
And I'm trying to show you right now that your physical harms, when you evaluate it alone, it has no bearing. And if you're going to be consistent, you're going to have to condemn geriatric pregnancies. Because if I hypothetically prove to you that a 12-year-old who reaches the age of menarche can consent, the variables that play on risks are going to be lower than a woman giving birth at older ages. 6.5% mortality rate, 4% mortality rate, sorry, not 6.5, 6.5 times the percentage of mortality for a geriatric pregnancy, compared to a 4 times percentage mortality rate for a younger person, compared to other complications I can give you where it is hidden. Even on the table. Yeah,
that's fine, but that's not the point I've ever made.
Yeah, he keeps saying that's not the point he made, as though like his first TikTok video wasn't solely, hey guys, there's a big harm. It's 4 times more likely. It's 4 times more likely that there's going to be a maternal mortality, when in reality, like, he's being deceptive with the stats. Okay, it's 4 times more likely, but at the same time, it's as I mentioned to him, like, okay, it's probably 4 times more likely for me to die from a shark than from a lightning strike. Like, so what, bro? Like, let's look at the percentages. Let's look at the likelihood.
It's also a bit weird because he talks about he was talking about the physical harms, and then as soon as you push him on the physical harms, he jumps back to the psychological harms, and then he just keeps moving between saying, "Oh, that wasn't my point," and then he keeps moving until he finds something that works, and then he goes with it. You know what I mean? And they keep saying, "Oh, physical harms is not a problem," but then he says, "Oh wait, no, it's actually both of them." So he just keeps changing his mind. It's so weird how he goes in circles.
And I'm willing to grant him the mental harms today. I'm willing to grant him that. I'm not advocating for girls to get married this young today in the West. What I am advocating for is the idea that those who lived in pre-modern societies were socially developed enough to be equipped as adults at young ages when they reach the age of puberty. Maybe not everyone as soon as they reach the age of puberty, but most people, that'll be the biggest signifier. In Islam, obviously, there's more that gets taken into account, and that'll be discussed later on. The father sees, okay, even though my daughter's reached the age of puberty, is she equipped enough to get married? Does it benefit her to get married to this individual? Does it benefit her to get married to someone that's older, or would it match her better if she marries someone that's closer to her age bracket? All these things are assessed by the father, and obviously the harms are taken into account as well. Like, the burden of proof is on him now to show that in the pre-modern age, we saw this harm that he's talking about, this mental harm. This whole mental harm thing that he's trying to say was applicable to pre-modern times. Well, he's only giving me studies from now. The reason why I'm advocating for, okay, there's going to be a difference is because of the psychosocial mismatch that I mentioned before. If a girl is not able to conduct adult responsibilities today, I would assume their incapability of doing that today has something to do with them not being able to get married today also, and why it causes these mental harms. If there was this like abundant and evident mental harm thing going on that would even be applicable in pre-modern times with pre-modern young marriages, then you would expect people to document that, people to witness that, people who experienced it talk about it. You didn't see that for 1700 years in Christian tradition even, or just even extending that later on where young marriages were common in other societies. We never see anyone saying, hey, there's a lot of mental harm happening to these young girls, even though millions of girls, tens of millions, were getting married at these really young ages that he's saying inevitably causes these mental harms. So because I don't see that, I don't see people mentioning it in the pre-modern times where these girls were getting married young, Yeah, and despite that, actually, they do document the physical harms. So they're not like ignorant of checking young pregnancies or young marriages and seeing the detriments that may come about from it. You would expect at least one person to document, hey, like there's something really wrong mentally with these young girls after they get married at these young ages compared to people getting married at older ages. But you just don't see that. And because I don't see that, the burden of proof is on him to show that there's no difference really between the modern age and the pre-modern age. Just because there's no difference in brain development, sure, whatever. We already showed you how brain development doesn't play much of a role. I'm mentioning something that is more evident than even brain development for pre-modern times today, and that's when someone's capable of adulthood responsibilities, and that's psychosocial maturation being taken into account, not brain development.
A consenting young person, a 12-year-old who reaches the age of menarche, she has less physical risks than a person that's 45. They're both consenting. Is that immoral now for a 12-year-old who is consenting, that has the body of someone who just reached the age of menarche, based on physical risks alone? Is that enough to say that this is immoral?
Okay, let me just say it back to you so I'm not taking out of context. So if you have someone who's the brain of an 18-year-old, but the body of a 12-year-old, and they want to try to have a child, okay, it's not necessarily, and I say that very, very cautiously, going to be immoral. But there's all sorts of other compounding factors here. So again, you have to have the mental development. Now, the reason why I think you're bringing this up is because I mentioned this. Hold on. No, but you can't isolate. You can't isolate it though, because we're talking about complicated human bodies, and there's always going to be compounding factors. If you remember, the guy I was originally responding to made the ridiculous claim that it's better to give birth from 13 to 14 than it is later in teens, because he said that the bones were.
Yeah, he just keeps running from the example. I'll just skip it until when he eventually concedes to the example.
Okay. Now, I want a proper direct response to what I'm saying. So just to clarify, are you saying that a girl that is 12 years of age with no mental damages, but the body we have, the physical aspect of giving birth, with no mental damages at all, just physical harms, would you consider that to be immoral? I just want to.
Sorry, say that again. I was checking on something. And by the way, how much time do you have?
As much time as you like.
Okay, I can probably go for another 20 minutes or so.
Just physical harm alone is not sufficient to say that marriages to 12-year-olds that reach the age of menarche is immoral. Physical harm alone isn't good enough.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we can continue now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's conceding on a big point. Now, if we can prove that there was no mental harm done to Aisha, and we can mention many other young marriages that happen at pre-modern age where there's no trace of mental harm being seen, then that gives precedence to our view. If we see no mentioning of any harms, in matching up with the psychosocial maturation times during the times of menstruation, then I have no reason to assume that it was causing any mental harms, right? Now, I believe there's not much left. I'll try to speed it up a bit more. Go on. Sorry, I feel like a summary of stuff I want to discuss.
Yeah, and I've done videos on the aspect of physical harm. And I've said, like, for example, harm is not necessarily evil. Like, so again, there's a whole bunch of other aspects to be considered to know whether harm is evil. I talked about this in my video on suffering, for example.
Okay, I understand that. I have a more comprehensive understanding of what you were trying to say.
So you've asked me a question. Can I now ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. So with regards to this whole thing, do you acknowledge that the overwhelming amount of research shows that early teen marriages result in a plethora of problems? Okay, and we know the brain was developing basically the same way as it was 2,000 years ago. Menarche was delayed. Girls could enter society in terms of how they were able to participate earlier, but that doesn't mean the brain was developing quicker. Do you acknowledge that these issues are real effects of child marriage?
Yeah, but when you get into what's the causes of these harms, I would dispute those. As you already said, like older marriages do cause for these mental harms to occur, as well as another factor that's at play here is
older marriages can cause some mental issues, but not the amount of extent of what we see child marriages. Yeah, it's far worse by far.
Yeah, sure. So the determining factors would be a lot. I wouldn't put it down to their brain development. I think that's like making it's a very nuanced discussion that shouldn't be reduced down to solely brain development, social factors, as well as other things that are at play that determines whether someone's ready or not. I already told you that a girl today, if in the West, a 12-year-old who's starting 7th grade, if she was to consummate a marriage, Islamically, that would be immoral on the pretense that she can't give consent. Right now, our dispute is just whether girls in a pre-modern age within these particular contexts were able to give consent or not, depending on social factors, not necessarily on brain development. I showed you that there's studies that show how limited brain examination of like neuroscience is on these sort of things. It's not good.
But in terms of psychology, so psychology is different than neuroscience. So there was an umbrella study. You know what an umbrella study is?
Yep.
What is an umbrella study?
Go ahead. like I might be misunderstanding. Just go ahead. You can define.
Okay, so you don't know what so an umbrella study is. Let me tell you what it is.
From what I know, it takes into account multiple studies and it goes.
No, it takes into account multiple meta-analyses. So meta-analyses are the ones who take multiple studies. An umbrella study looked at multiple meta-analyses. Remember, this one called long-term outcomes of childhood sexual abuse. It found, for example, that child sexual abuse was associated with 26 to 28 specific outcomes of psychiatric diagnoses. All studied negative psychosocial outcomes ranging from all physical health conditions to strongest psychiatric association with child sexual abuse reported from conversion disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression. Systematic review for 2 psychiatric outcomes, post-traumatic stress.
Is he equating sexual abuse, like forced sexual encounters with people engaging in younger marriages?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that what this is?
The issue is, the issue is that, as I mentioned later, I'm not defending like young marriages, generally speaking. I'm specifically defending young marriages in the context of being done in an Islamic manner that, yeah, obviously is done between 2 practicing Muslims, right? So, like, if someone deviates from that, or there's a high likelihood that they will deviate from that, what's that got to do with it's got nothing to do with a child or a young marriages inherently itself, but more so just the individuals or like other mitigating factors, right?
I'm a bit confused there. My misunderstanding is he talking about forced sexual encounters? Is that what this is? This sexual abuse thing? Is he talking about forced sexual encounters? Like, what's going on here? He's talking about child marriages or forced sexual encounters? Because he says sexual abuse.
He's talking about sexual abuse in the context of getting married young. It's more likely to occur.
Okay.
But I don't see how. I mean, I don't see how, if you mitigate for these factors by making sure that you get your young daughter, married to someone who won't abuse them. Like, of course, like maybe even like if we talk about domestic violence, possibly it's more heightened, of course, but that would be just put down to other factors like the culture of the society, the morals of that society, and so on. Like, if we have let's say like the best generations, like the earliest generations of Muslims that came about through the Prophet, these generations of Muslims, and when they conducted young marriages, do we see this? Do we see these like heightened likelihood? No, like, because they're actually practicing the religion properly, and they're going through the proper factors needed to go through prior to getting married so young, right? So what I'm defending here is Islamic young marriages. I'm not talking about young marriages generally that are being misapplied today, like in, I don't know, some Christian country in Africa. Actually, most of these stats are taken from Christian countries in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Most of them aren't actually taken from Arab states or Muslim states.
Stress disorder and schizophrenia, and 1 psychosocial outcome, substance misuse, met with high quality standards. So they know there's a plethora of mental issues that come out of just sexual interaction with children at this point. And just slapping a marriage contract on it doesn't fix that, because they're just simply not ready for that kind of stuff. And that just because in 500, 1,000 years ago, girls were ready to enter society in terms of what they were required to do in that society. That doesn't mean they're ready for sex, because the brain is not developed to where it needs to be. So they can enter in society in terms of helping with household aspects. That's psychosocial, but full mental aspects are going to be the same as they are now.
Yeah, sure. So another thing to take into account is Aisha from Elder did not deal with any of the mental health issues that you actually brought up, right? So it doesn't apply to the morality of, even if I was to concede this, hypothetically speaking, if I was to concede this point, it does not apply to what the Prophet did. It applies to particular instances where it's being misapplied. Now, the second thing I'm going to say is regarding all of these sort of studies that you pulled up, is the causation of such as psychological disturbances or complications. I would have to dispute. I wouldn't say it's solely on the grounds of them being young. It would have to be other determining factors. We don't see this abundance of sort of psychological disturbances or complications coming about in the pre-modern age. We see it now, and we have to determine, okay, why is it that we didn't see it back then, and they seem equipped back then, but they do see, but they don't seem equipped today. We're going to have to go into that, right? And we're going to disagree on whether they work within culture or not. But
that's an assumption. I mean, like, you didn't have psychiatrists or diagnosis.
I don't have my understanding of what's determined as psychosocial maturation or mental maturation or psychological maturation, what I want to say, regarding consent. I don't have that determined based upon neuroscience or psychological data. I have that determined based upon whether she's functioning optimally within a society as a functioning adult. The study I gave you shows explicitly that a girl back then can uphold adulthood responsibilities. Part of that is consenting to certain things, which includes consenting towards relations.
No, that is an assumption. That is not supported by that at all. Again, they don't even say that they're ready for sexual relations, because they were more in the research. It's a psychosocial aspect, so it's going to involve the ability to enter society and act in a social way. So again, if you go to hunter-gatherer society,
does the study say they can function as an adult?
Where does it say they can function as an adult in every single aspect?
Oh, okay, every single aspect. I think that's stipulation. So when it says
yes, because that's, the important aspect is sex. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. If they're ready for that, and there's no scientific evidence they will be.
I don't even. Okay, listen. The determining factor.
Talib, I think you wanted to talk about that as well prior to this. The whole, like, he doesn't want to grant the link between psychosocial maturity here and them being equipped to consent.
Yeah, I'd like to know what his basis for that is. How does he believe that you can determine when someone is psychologically mature to consent or not? That's quite a weird thing to say about this, because I want to know what he would use. What metric is he using? Does he go over what metric he uses instead, other than brain scans and things like that? What
No,
is there
no,
a
no.
psychological?
It would just say that the people in the past were ignorant of it, and they just had no, like, they didn't have the tools at their disposal. They worked the best. They were working with the best that they had, but it still led them towards allowing pedophilia.
And I think there's something else problematic here, which is that he says, "Oh, just because you slap marriage on it, that doesn't mean it's legitimized." It's like, bro, what do you mean? What do you mean? Isn't the whole point of marriage in Christianity and in Islam, the whole point is it legitimizes the marriage? Have I missed something?
Hmm. Yeah, this guy. I mean, I think that was part of the debate with Daniel as well. He didn't want to say which one was more immoral between relations between, let's say, I think it was like between, like, let's say, two 12-year-olds, like a 12-year-old male and a 12-year-old female, having relations outside of marriage. What's worse, that or a 20-year-old that has relations with a 12-year-old, but they're married? And he didn't want to say which one was worse. He said, like, they're both moral. They're both equally immoral.
So the marriage means nothing to him then. So, essentially, this guy's all for adultery, it looks like.
Factors on when someone is able to consent or not, even if I didn't have any scientific data on this, my determining factor on when I actually grant that someone is mentally mature or not will be based upon them functioning optimally. I wouldn't have an understanding, or someone in the pre-modern world wouldn't have an understanding of when someone is ready to give consent based upon some neurological data or psychosocial data or psychological data. They made inferences based upon empirical stuff they could see from functioning young adults and when they could see them to be competent. That's so complicated to get into based on ages now, because we can't even put an age number on that. We can't even put an age range, because there's going to be exceptions and determining factors for every person that you got to treat on a case-to-case basis. And even today we can't give proper neurological data as I cited. I think that's the strongest thing to actually determine if we did have concrete neurological data on this. That would be more definitive. But that's not the case. It's not the same thing as physical harms. Physical harms is much more clear cut.
But we do have all the evidence of psychiatric issues that are arising from this. And so those would be there.
Yeah, I'll just dispute the causes of said harms.
You can, but they did adjusted. The study, one of the studies I cited, used adjusted ratios. So it adjusted for compounding factors like poverty and other aspects as well. So it's still coming from child marriage. So they've adjusted for that.
Sure. And do they bring rates? But even rates of depression or suicide rates or all these things you're going to cite for mental harms, even the factor of when something is considered to be at a rate that is determined to be immoral is another factor. So how much suicidal rate or how much of a mental harm rate does it have to be for you to say that this is immoral? That's again another thing that needs to get into. But I'm also going to have to compare it with older marriages and the physical and the mental harms that come back from them, and how comprehensive they actually are as well. So
in one of the reviews I cited, overlooked and unaddressed, they say a cross-sectional study in Vietnam by Hong Lee et al. Found that even when adjusting for other risk factors, early marriage was associated with an increased risk of intimate partner violence. So that's one of the studies they're reviewing. Girls married before the age of 18 face nearly twice the risk.
Yeah. Why would I care? Okay, give me. If the only way that this could be analogous, if you had a Muslim society abiding by Muslim morals, abiding by Muslim practices of marriage, and you give me such a study of young marriages producing all of these mental harms, I would like to see the mental harms and the suicide rates of people in Vietnam, generally speaking, not even just from younger marriages. That'd be interesting to look into as well. There's a lot of different variables that have to be taken into account. If we're going to apply this to the if we're going to apply this, I'm not.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure, like, places like Vietnam and stuff, they generally have a lot of, because they're very atheistic, they generally have a lot of psychiatric problems, if I'm not mistaken. They have a lot of mental issues, high suicide rates, high depression rates, and so on, right?
Yeah, it's also correlated with autism. Like, you're more likely to be autistic if you're an atheist.
Wait, what? Where do you
Yeah,
have-
you're not. You didn't read this?
That's
Did you hear about this? I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up, yo.
Yeah, give me that study.
Yeah, I got you.
They're the most empathetic people, huh?
They're a little slow.
Bro, what?
Younger marriages specifically, in every given case, be optimal, would be the best situation. There might be a lot of cases where it's not the best situation and the girls won't be ready early on, but that's where the father comes into play, and that's where the situation is assessed on whether it's compatible for such a marriage to be conducted or not. So I'm not making a general statement that every young girl that just reached menarche can go into such marriages. Things have to be assessed, and that's exactly why the Prophet ﷺ, just to hadith to finish up, the Prophet ﷺ mentions in the hadith when Umar and Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, approached the Prophet for his daughter's hand in marriage, which was about 12 to 17. When they approached for her hand in marriage, the Prophet said, she's young, in the she's young. So, but later on, Ali, who was younger, and after time had passed when Fatima did mature, mature a bit more, then the Prophet said, okay, yeah, she can have a marriage value at a later time when they're more compatible. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing about young marriages. There's many things that are taken into account in respect to fathers, assessing the situation for the child, and yeah, they're making that decision for her based upon benefits and risks.
Yeah, I know that you argue that there are different circumstances for different girls. The problem is when we look even in Muslim societies, we don't see good results coming out of child marriages. So I mean, like, there's no data to support this is going to happen. You just have like sort of...
Yeah, he's ignoring the psychosocial mismatch as well. Of course, like there needs to be a psychosocial match, and the marriages have to be conducted. Were the marriages that produce these harms, were they conducted in a proper Islamic way? These things have to be assessed. They have to be judged on whether they've been done in the proper way or not.
Yes, because because the studies they're looking at are Pakistan. They're looking at Pakistan, look at Bangladesh. They looked at all sorts of various countries. Turkey was included, Jordan, Iran. They looked at various studies that have been done. And this is just sort of like, it makes you play on falsifiable because you can just say, well, they're not practicing Islam perfectly there. Okay, maybe, but again, why don't we see ever practically playing out that this is actually going to result in some sort of okay behavior, let alone any morally good behavior? Why is it always these girls come out messed up in multiple ways? It just seems far better to not go on the ethics of the past and follow what the science is saying and saying, hey, we should let girls wait till they're 18 before we expect any of this kind of stuff on them, because this is far better for their mental and physical development.
Yeah, sure. So the countries you listed, I'd like to see those studies and compare them to the rate of other non-Muslim studies, and I'd like to look at whether they're practicing Muslims or not. There could be a lot of, I mean,
there's no evidence that practicing Muslims are going to fix these issues.
I don't even care specifically on aspects of religion or whether they're fasting or not necessarily. What I'm talking here is whether they've conducted the marriage in an Islamic manner. Now, that's what's at dispute here. So that's a very important aspect. Did the father of the girl actually go ahead and assess the situation for the daughter to see if they're compatible or not, or did he just throw his daughter at the first opportunity he had to get her married? These aspects need to be taken into account. If the risks have been assessed by the father, if the social aspects are being addressed, is this girl actually psychosocially mature for such a marriage at such an age? In Pakistan, even there is still a delay in maturity, even though it's a Muslim country, and even though it's not as developed as possibly other countries, there's still that psychosocial mismatch, as I mentioned. So it's not in comparison to these pre-modern young marriages conducted in Islamic societies. Well, now, if you show me within like
Dean, I just wanted to add something. I'm from Bangladesh, right? Like my parents are from Bangladesh, and I can even and if you're a Desi, if you're from that South Asia, you know this: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. One of the things that's there, and this is a cultural thing, nothing to do with religion, but forced marriages is a huge thing there. It's huge, and this is a good point you brought up because it is a big thing within these cultures. So they'll force you, get you married to somebody you don't even know. This is a very good point you made.
Because that's what we look to as the optimal time where the people are practicing religion the best. If you show me from that, for example, the Prophet's marriage to Aisha, for example, young marriages conducted by the companions, if you show me any mental harm or psychological harm or any complaints about the reason why they're having these issues because of them being immature mentally, if you can show me that, then sure, I would take that into account. But when you gave me Pakistan, a country doesn't even rule by Islamic law properly, I'm not going to take that into account, especially without proper consideration of what these fathers are doing when they're marrying off their young girls.
Okay, this is just ad hoc recipe. You can just say, well, they're not doing this. As I mentioned, you just make a claim on false Bible. As of now, the actual data that we do have doesn't show any benefits of child marriage and shows excessive harm. So at the end of the day, we gotta know what the actual evidence is, not these random hypotheticals where we get some alleged purpose from society.
Is it being taken from societies where child marriage is prominent?
Yes, that's exactly where they're going.
Okay, sure. My whole claim is that it shouldn't be prominent. It should be done in specific cases where you see your daughter mature enough for said marriage, and you see that there's massive benefit in you marrying off your daughter. I quote you a scholar, a classical scholar, Imam Nawawi, where he says that young girls should not be married off unless you see clear benefit.
Yeah. And here, I understand that's what you're saying, but my argument is we have no evidence any girl will be ready at these young ages. It's just not supported by the data.
Aisha's evidence right in front of me. Like, there's no mental harm done to her. She was married online.
Okay. No psychologist was able to evaluate her. She was done in quite a culture that was going to constantly reinforce this was good. We see the same thing like these psychologists Anna Salter notes, and there's these type of cultures, they groom the girls to think it's great and they just say it's great. You're basically just going on self-reporting measures.
You're not going to have a modern society today when there's this mismatch of them not being able to adapt to general adulthood responsibilities. So why would you expect them to be able to match up with getting married at such a young age? That makes no sense.
I'm not talking about adult activities. I'm talking about psychiatric issues that come from sexual interaction. I'm just saying that Aisha's the exception is like the greatest ad hoc recipe ever.
I'm not saying she's the exception. I'm telling you she's one example, a clear example that you know of a young marriage that was done that didn't cause any mental harms. There could be other cases.
Allegedly, that's the claim. We don't see any evidence to support it, though, other than she said she was fine. But a lot of the same kids that have been abused stay there fine, and they go get psychiatric evaluations, and then they're told they have all these issues. For example, if you have psychiatric issues you have young, you grow up thinking they're normal because that's how you start developing with them, and then you tell people they're normal, and then no one realizes. So a lot of mental issues go undiagnosed for years. Some people don't even get diagnosed because they grew up thinking that's just how the normal way they're supposed to react and sort of.
Sure, the same way you told me that I'm giving you an unfalsifiable assessment. You're giving me the same thing. If I show you young girls getting married that doesn't cause harm, I'm just going to say that they thought there was no abuse or they thought there was a mental harm, but there actually was. So
the difference is I have studies that show there is harm that caused from this, and if you just bring up other reports from the past that no, they weren't harmed, it's inconsistent.
But the studies can't be conducted in the pre-modern age where I'm saying there would be no harm. So that's the whole point.
But there's no evidence.
No, his studies don't factor in other things. That's the problem. He's just saying, "Oh, look, the girls are depressed and they're sad because of child marriage." How do you know? What other factors are there? You can't. You're just You're just saying, well, because they happen to get married young, therefore they're sad. No, there's a lot of factors. You've mentioned a few, like for example, they're in a third world country. That has a huge effect. There's so many societal issues. There's within the forced marriages, like I mentioned. There's so many things. Like he's just like hand waving it off. Oh no, child marriage. That's why. Like no, this is not true. Sorry, what were you about to say?
I'm actually interested to look into these studies you mentioned about the temporal lobe, because from what I saw before as well, it reaches peak development between the ages of 9 and 12. So I'm not even sure if he's right on that. So I'm still yet to double check that. But even if I grant it, bro, like, why? Like, why does it have to be at peak development? Justify that. Like, there's no inextricable link between the harm and them having to, and them not allowing it to fully develop. In the same way that your frontal lobe doesn't fully develop, or your pubescent features don't fully develop. Okay, it's not optimal, but show me why it's immoral. Show me why it not being optimal leads to some harm that would lead to it being immoral.
Look at the way girls react now. We can say, look at all the harm caused. Likely it's happened in the past.
I gave you a psychosocial mismatch. I gave you
Psychosocial is not the same as mental.
if a girl cannot, okay, if there's inhibiting factors that are causing for a girl to not be able to conduct general adulthood responsibilities, I would think that would mean that she's not able to give consent in the same way. So if we did have a society where there is a psychosocial matching between menarche and psychosocial maturity, that would be a study I would be interested in looking at. We don't have that today, so yeah, there's not really something we can do with that.
We have girls today that are in child marriages and we see all this harm. It's likely the same thing was resulting in the past. For example, we have studies that say that the same thing happens to the boys. When they are abused, all sorts of mental harm result from that. What the Greeks and Romans were doing was probably causing harm, even though no one went around talking about it because they just didn't know any better. And society was basically messed up for numerous reasons that we have fixed in the modern era. So this is just...
Actually, no, I should have pulled him up on this point. The early church did condemn that, what he just said, like those young marriages to those little boys. The early church condemned that because of the harm that they saw it produces, right? So, yeah, he's actually wrong. And there was many people that would have condemned it within their societies. Some people would see it as a norm, but it's the same thing. Like young marriages were unanimously agreed to be okay.
This is not comparable here, because I can say, look at all the harm caused in studies today. Look at how brains are basically the same 2,000 years ago. We should expect the same results, even if it went missed by people who are far more focused on making sure they grew enough food than getting their kids proper psychiatric evaluations.
Yeah, I think you have to leave, and I think you designated it at whatever the time is for you. When after 11:30 a.m. I'm guessing that's where you wanted to end. So
yeah, we've got for about 2 hours though. I don't think we're going to reach agreement on this. At the end of the day, I'm going to stand on science and to determine what is going to be ethical, because that's what virtue ethics is.
I'm going to stand with the early church. I'm going to stand with the early church. You can stand with science.
I mean, the early church would encourage this because this is why we get science out of the Christian world, and we don't get stuck with ethics that are, based on very limited scientific data that can help us determine what's ethical.
But yeah, I do appreciate you giving me like this platform to speak with you, and that we can have like this discourse. I think generally like it was very respectful, and I appreciate that we could have this like discourse and give our audiences like both perspectives. And yeah, I do appreciate the discourse.
Yeah, I'm fine having conversations occasionally on this type of topic, because I think it's an important topic, and it's important to point out all the damage child marriage does to girls and why it shouldn't be abolished worldwide.
Sure, and I agree with you. A girl today is not mentally mature to consent. We're just debating whether
I appreciate that, and I'm glad you're saying that. So I will take that and say, yes, you're obviously far better than someone like Daniel Tikichu.
I didn't watch what he was saying, but yeah, maybe we have a disagreement on.
Oh, you would disagree with him for sure. He wants to say that a girl that enters precocious puberty can be married off and consummate the marriage. He admitted that in the debate.
Yeah, just to make clear, there's like we have like.
Is that the case though? Did he say that?
I don't. So this IP gave like a weird analogy. Oh, there's if a 4-year-old has precocious puberty and she's like very would you allow her? And Daniel is like, yeah.
That's
I know, but he's just like giving this like the craziest analogy, like. And Daniel was like, yeah. Daniel was like, yeah.
Wait, was he saying? Was he asking Daniel, hypothetically speaking, if a 4-year-old? Yeah. But that hypothetical was impossible either way.
Yeah, but the point is, I don't know. I guess Daniel took the bait. Like, I don't know. He's like, by the way, I showed autism and atheism study. By the way, check it out.
Yeah, I'll have a
I
look.
just want to say, Dean, you did like a really good job on debate. You definitely stood your stance, especially with the morality part. And I just wanted to say like a quick thing about his argument, right? So like just a few things. So basically, you know how so basically back then, of course, it was definitely a norm for people to get married at a young age. Let's take it back to at least 1,000 years ago. Many people, back then got married around the age of 12 or 13, and usually the men were older, but the women were younger, on the age of like teen years. And because this is probably why, because the woman can live long, provide for the and take care of the children for longer, and when the man passes, like the woman has more like if there's 10 more children she needs to take care of.
Yeah,
then
and also naturally
yeah,
speaking as well, men are naturally attracted to women that are younger. Women are naturally more attracted to men who are older. Why? Because women are naturally hypergamous. They want a man with a high social status, a man that has high socioeconomic status, a man with who is developed and secure. They want that security, so they would marry someone. Not they wouldn't want to marry someone in their teens. They would want to marry someone older than that, that's established, that has that perception by society that this person is well respected, right? You don't get that when you're in your teens back then. A woman back then, their value in terms of marriage would be especially looked at in terms of their virginity. Obviously, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be a virgin, and the more prime you would be of your age in terms of your physical developments as well.
yeah. And so yeah, that's just one thing that he can look at. And also, I was going to say, definitely in schools today, many boys and girls are in the same journey class. They have boys and girls mixing, and lots of times these boys and girls, they go into class, they meet the girl, or the boy meets the boy, or the girl meets the boy. Then they end up, having
Boy meets the
relations.
boy. That's crazy, yo.
That's all right. I mixed it. And then they end up having relations together. So this just proves more like, yeah, some of them are definitely sexually attracted at a young age. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, they're mentally mature for marriage yet. But again, if you were to look back then, why wasn't there any problems, or anyone like stating any problems back then that, yeah, a young marriage is a problem? No one ever said that back then, 1,000
Yeah,
years ago.
what they
So it
did
was normal.
do as well, lactose. Another thing they would do is, well, they actually knew the physical harms, as you mentioned in the debate, like Seranus of Ephesus. People knew that, like, obviously they knew, like, they would see like the high rate of infant mortality, the high rate of maternal mortality. They would see all of these harms at young marriages, and guess what? They would still maintain it's not immoral. The early church would still maintain it's not immoral. The early church wasn't like ignorant of young marriages causing more harm. Of course, people knew that. Like, this is general knowledge that society would have. Now, his main point was on the mental aspect, but the mental aspect as well. Why don't we see people condemning that? Why don't we see people saying, "Hey, these little girls, when they reach the age of puberty, they're not actually mentally ready"? We don't see people saying that. We see people saying the opposite, and people actually ubiquitously so in every society saying puberty is good enough after they meet the other rites
Yeah.
of passage within the society. Puberty was always seen to be the requirement that allowed for a girl to get married, and they never saw it as, hey, like, maybe we should delay it a bit more because of some mental harms, right?
Yeah, sorry, that was my brother. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. You made a really good point, and yeah, I just saw lots of flaws in what he said. I mean, like, basically me, I'm the kind of guy that just keep it straightforward and simple, like how I did. Yeah. So
I appreciate it. Jazakallah khair. And I'll probably do one more question or one more like discussion. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name, but Canisto, I think.
Q8 Nistel.
Q8 Nisto. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Dean, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you? What should I call you, bro?
Yeah, you can call me Nistel. Nistel is fine.
No worries.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, bro. I've seen you around in Discord and other places, bro. Yeah, I appreciate the support, man. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the Discord's really great. Helped me a lot with Islam the past few weeks. So yeah, I just have one quick question about IP and people like him. So when you talk to him, you quickly realize that he doesn't care about the Christian tradition. He can freely reject it. So when you tell him about something and he says, "Oh no, those, like the church fathers, they're just wrong," it's his stance. It's not like quote unquote the official stance of the church. Or has there been other theologians that condemned the church fathers or anything like that. So the question is, what's the value in talking to someone like that? Because they're not really defending Christianity anymore at that point.
At that point, the purpose would then be, specifically with inspiring philosophy, would be to show Christians that you're, because a lot of Christians, even if they're Catholic or they come from like Eastern Orthodox views, so like they come from some apostolic church, they would assume that inspiring philosophy's position is grounded in their tradition. The purpose of me like debating him was to expose the fact that no, hey, we got Aquinas here saying 12 and below, Tertullian saying 12 and below, Origen saying 12 and below, canon law in the Catholic Church saying up until 1917 the minimum age is 12, and there would be exceptions to that if you reach the age of puberty prior and the age of menarche prior. So the purpose of this debate was to show, hey, like this guy's an atheist, like he doesn't have any ground to stand on when it comes to morality. He gets his morals from science and from a consequentialist view in terms of there's some harm that comes from this cause. Well, okay, we see those harms. The early church sees those harms. They have this set of morals, the virtue ethics. The early church are the best people to dictate in terms of what's moral and immoral based upon the principles and the teachings that Jesus and the disciples would have given them. If you're going to say that they weren't competent enough in establishing morality for people for 1700 years, that's going to put into question their reliability generally. Are they not able to distinguish between what's a major sin and not a major sin now? You know, it puts on like the reliability to question, and it also exposes the fact that Christians have to take a very big step back and say, hey, like this whole criticism against Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it might shoot us ourselves in the foot. Are we really willing to consider that for 1700 years, our early church all allowed pedophilia, a major sin, a major sexual immorality? This is a clear statement that Jesus would be against. And however, the early church never figured this out for 1700 years with a verse, I believe it's in Matthew, where Jesus says to not harm the little ones. Well, part of harming the little ones is you know, conducting the act of pedophilia. So if the apostolic tradition and the early church aren't able to distinguish what's a child and what's not a child, then how are they supposed to gain intelligibility of what Jesus means by little ones? Don't harm the little ones. Okay, how do we know what the little ones are? How do we know what Jesus means by that? Well, we need to wait 1700 years until science tells us. Like, what? Like, come on. Another point would be that I mentioned earlier in the stream. I don't know if you saw it, but this is a really good point I should have mentioned, but I just didn't think of at the time, is the point that Jesus says in a verse to distinguish between true apostles or true prophets or true teachers and false ones. The distinguishing factor between the two would be that there's one is a good tree and one is a bad tree. He gives the parable of like one producing good fruits, the other one producing bad fruits. St. Augustine talks about this, and many like early church commentators, they talk about this meaning their actions. Like false prophets, you see bad actions through them. True prophets, you see good actions from them. Okay, this extends to like apostles and teachers, right? This isn't just like prophets according to them. If we're going to apply this principle now, what would be considered a bad action that the early church were teaching? Well, a bad action would be teaching that pedophilia is okay. Does that mean that now we have to throw under the bus 1700 years worth of early Christian tradition, consider them all to be like bad trees and producing bad fruits by allowing for this sexual immorality to fester for 1700 years? That's another factor, man. This is very like detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to a lot of internal inconsistencies. They're going to have why are they now going to be cognitively dissonant to to this happening in their tradition? But when the Prophet ﷺ does this action of getting married at a young age, what do they say? Oh, he's producing bad fruit. He applies with this verse. If the Prophet ﷺ applies for that verse in producing bad fruit, then don't be inconsistent. Apply that the 1700 years of early church tradition are also producing bad fruit, and they would also apply as false teachers according to this verse, which they obviously don't want to concede.
I don't think people realize, like, when it comes to Christians, they're not like, like church fathers, like you mentioned, they don't care. Like let's be for real. They're willing to blame prophets for many heinous things. Like IP said that, oh, the concubines and all that, and mentioned in the Old Testament, oh, that was just Moses' fault, which is completely false. But this is what he says. So
Yeah,
if they're
those are
willing
all
to,
under the bus. The
so if he's
prophets, disciples,
if
the
he's
early
willing to
church.
throw the prophets under the bus, the disciples and the church fathers are nothing.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
can throw
that's a
the
good point.
whole thing. They will throw every single person under the. Oh no, it's what's it called? It's 18. Why? Because like it's the moral thing to do. Why is it the moral thing to do? Oh, because secularism.
And
They
then,
don't
and
want
then
to say it directly, but this is what it is.
you're gonna have to put into question now. Okay, where do you know your religion from? Where do you get your moralities from? Okay, you get your morality from Jesus. He's the only infallible one. Sure, I'll grant that. How do you extract now what Jesus meant by his parables? Jesus spoke in very ambiguous ways in the New Testament. How do you understand what he meant by "don't harm the children"? How do you understand by all these parables he's giving about the fig tree and about good trees and bad trees? How do you know what these things mean? It's
Yeah,
through the
that's
Like
another
apostolic
thing.
they think by children you mean like below 18, basically. Like and this is such a dumb thing to say. Like if you really believe it during Jesus' time, he's referring to children as below 18. Like you're crazy. Like you're actually delusional.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems like they don't care about like anyone to bridge between the layman and what Jesus said. They would rather interpret the Bible based on what they
science.
think is right.
The
Yeah, or
science.
science, exactly. Yeah.
Even- and science is forever changing, which means what? It means we don't have a concrete interpretation of what Jesus said. They're just continuously changing based upon the evidences that are being presented. But even the evidences itself, I still disputed with them. I don't agree with this harm factor being so great back then. He didn't justify it. But yeah, I think we'll end the stream there. But it's been a good 2 hours. Unless you have any like other like pressing questions.
But
Nistal
just one
or-
more question, if you don't mind.
course.
When they
Go ahead.
talk about thanks. When they talk about sexual relationships, they really say like for example, a lot of brothers brought this up. When there are sexual relationships between individuals who are very close in age, they don't mind that. They don't care about that. They don't bring up any of this harm stuff. Only when there's a huge gap in age, it's really when they become concerned. What do you think about this point?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, but the reason why I didn't bring it up is because that'll open like a whole can of worms on whether I'm advocating for as a solution today for like young teenagers in the West. Young teenagers in the West, when they have relations, they do have this double standard, as you're saying, of what, hey, actually, as I mentioned before in the debate with Daniel that he mentions how he doesn't see a distinction between two 12-year-olds, a 12-year-old male, a 12-year-old female having relations, and a 12-year-old female, and let's say like an adult male having relations. He sees them both equally as bad, even though one of them is within the grounds of marriage, which would be like the 12-year-old and 20-year-old. He sees them both equally as bad, which obviously isn't the case. One is fornication, the other one isn't, and one of them is explicitly condemned in your Bible, the other one isn't. So I wouldn't propose it as like some solution to what's happening today. I would say like Muslims, young people generally, they should be fasting and trying to get married as soon as possible within their states. I think that is the case, and I wouldn't advocate for anyone to like get married so young, between like the ages of 9 and 14 or 15 or so. I don't think many people develop because of like psychosocial factors that I mentioned before, like with the studies. But if you are someone that even some people when they reach the age of 18, they're still not psychosocially developed enough to get married. Like a lot of them, they wouldn't be developed enough. A lot of people, as you see, like they're not ready for marriage, even reaching the age of 20. I'm sure like we've all experienced like seeing people like that, right?
Yeah.
So it really depends. It really depends on everyone on a case-to-case basis. But but even if we're talking about, let's say, someone. Let's say someone living like outside of a Western context where there's not this psychosocial mismatch. Let's say girls conducting marriages within let's say parts of Africa or parts of India or so on, where there is no like mismatch between the two because they're able to conduct adulthood responsibilities at young ages. Then that would be a better like, okay, we have a solution here, because Islam isn't specifically for like a one size fits all. I think Ibn al-Qayyim talks about this. I can try to bring up the quote soon, where he talks about how like the Sharia is applicable for every situation depending upon the circumstances. So during the Prophet's circumstances, sure, some people could be ready, But now we assess, okay, are people ready today with the same principles that the Prophet applied? The answer is no. So yeah, we have these principles that we apply for every situation. As Ibn Fadl mentioned before, someone could be 18 and they possibly don't have the body needed to endure relations. They might even have to wait a bit longer. Some people reach puberty later abnormally. So yeah, it's not one size fits all. It's a holistic approach, and this is why, as Daniel mentioned in his debate, it's very, very important that the father, a responsible adult Muslim male, it could be even an imam or someone, is the one that decides on behalf of the girl whether this is a compatible marriage or not, or whether she's ready for the marriage or not. This is why it's very important, and that's why it's a very bad point from him to just throw the judgment, or to put into question the judgment of 1700 years of humans under the bus, and we're somehow enlightened today, like in the 21st century. I don't buy that.
Yeah, I agree with that totally.
But yeah, Lactose, do you have any other questions, or is that all from you guys?
I did want to ask, like, since it says somewhere, or my mom told me that with Aisha radiallahu anhu, that she was meant for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So like, if it was like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, like, oh yes, Aisha radiallahu anhu will, like, it's meant for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though whether the age, don't you think that's like besides like all this that we're
if we're talking about the
Allah said, if Allah commanded, like we have to like respect what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded, so that would just destroy the whole argument of him.
No, of course. I'm talking more generally speaking, because obviously it's not an exceptional case where only Aisha was allowed to get married at the age of 9. It could be applicable to other ages and other times and other circumstances. So that's what particularly I was addressing. But if it was particularly on the point of Aisha, whether it was moral for her to marry the Prophet ﷺ, then sure, yeah, we can talk about. We have reasons to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have reasons to believe Islam is true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically commanded the Prophet to marry Aisha. May Allah be pleased with her. So he has to disprove Islam false for me to not hold to this moral claim. We're morally justified to believe the Prophet ﷺ's act was moral. But when talking about generally applying it, where Allah's command isn't generally applied here, how do we justify the morality of this in light of like these supposed harms? That's what I was kind of like trying to address. But when I think I got the quote here that I was going to mention before from Ibn al-Qayyim. And by the way, Akhi, it's when you say when you mention a female that you're saying may Allah be pleased with her, you say anha, not anhu. That's from else.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, here's the quote from Ibn al-Qayyim. This is a very good website. I recommend everyone to use it for hadiths, or if you have any questions, really. He has really good responses. This is abuaminaalias.com. He gives a quote from Ibn al-Qayyim here. Verily, the law is founded upon wisdom and welfare for people in this life and the hereafter. In its entirety, it is justice, mercy, benefit, and wisdom. Every matter which abandons justice for tyranny, mercy for cruelty, benefit for corruption, and wisdom for foolishness is not a part of the law, even if it was introduced therein by an interpretation. Right? So what he's saying basically here is that we assess it based upon if we see justice being there, mercy being there, benefit, and wisdom. If we apply the Sharia and we don't see these productions coming about from said action, then it's an action that shouldn't be applied. And this is exactly what's being talked about here with young marriages. It's a case-to-case basis. We try to make sure we ensure there's justice, mercy, and wisdom being applied here. If not, then it would be prohibited.
That's like a really good point too. Because like if the Sharia law, like that would stop somebody from like trying to get like a young girl just to abuse her.
Yeah, of course, everything's taken into account, and it's
Yeah.
being assessed. It's being assessed by
Because
the elders.
because that's like most of the Christians think, oh, like if a man wants to marry like a young girl, that means like, oh, he wants to like do like bad things to her, but like the Sharia law prevents that either way. So that's like a really good point.
Of course, the Sharia protects women more than any other legislative system.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
inshallah,
that's all for me. So assalamu alaikum.
wa alaikum salam. Inshallah, if you guys have anything else to say before I end the live.
No, I'm okay. Jazakallah khair. Just hopefully we have more of these beneficial sessions, inshallah. Yeah, it's really
Right, yeah.
enjoyable.
Inshallah. Anything to
Okay.
say, Talib or Ibn Fadl, before I end the live?
No, just Jazakallah khair
No,
for having
pleasure.
me. Alhamdulillah, I think this was very, very beneficial.
Alright, yeah. Alright, guys, so end the stream now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Wa alaikum salam.